IB Nation, welcome back to another episode of the Irish Breakdown Podcast brought to you by FanDuel. Happy Friday, everybody. There is college football on a week from tomorrow. We've made it. We are almost out of the darkness of the offseason, and there will be football on our TV 7 days from Saturday in week 0. But we have a lot coming your way today, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to be talking about really a handful of different things. We're going to kick off today's show talking about, we've seen some questions about it in the chat already, but about the Michigan sanctions that just got released today. We're going to talk about those, break those down, and then we're going to break down the practice report. Brian and company were at practice this morning. I did not make the trip up from Indianapolis because of the limited media availability, so I've been holding the fort down here in Indianapolis, but we are going to go through what went down at practice today. And then we are wrapping up our conference preview series, and we're going to be talking some Big 12 football today. So, Brian, loaded slate for this Friday, man. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I am ready to rock and roll. I just put an update on the board, some things I'm hearing about the quarterback situation. So if you're a member, go check that out. We're going to only have that on there for now because there's nothing official, but just some things that I've just been hearing about decision timeline, who the decision is going to be and all that kind of stuff. So go check that out on the board if you're a premium member. But until there's more official word, we're just going to keep that on the premium board for now. But I'm excited about this. You know, I always enjoy talking to Big 12. It's a really entertaining league. We got some very interesting thoughts on it, predictions. And then I definitely want to get into this Michigan stuff. We were just talking beforehand. I'm surprised by some of the reactions to it, but you know, we'll see. We'll kind of see how it goes. So, yeah, it's going to be a very interesting day. But, of course, got a chance to see the first 4 periods. And there are some interesting observations today. Not like a lot to report like, oh, we saw this. But, you know, we did see some 3-versus-3 scrimmage. And I got a chance to watch some O-line play. And yeah, some interesting stuff. So we'll kind of do that. And then the Michigan thing at the first. And then we'll dive into the Big 12. So I'm ready to rock and roll, Trev. You ready to go today?
Always am. Always am, Brian. Let's do this thing. So –
that's what I like about you, Trevor. You're always ready to go, man.
Stay ready, never have to get ready, baby. Let's do this thing.
That's what I love about you.
Let's do this thing. Well, Brian, let's talk practice then first before we dive into what happened with Michigan today. So you were up there. It's another abbreviated practice that you got to see. There's already an intel piece up on the message boards about it, boards.irishbreakdown.com, and the Champions Lounge. When you were up there today, what were just some of the takeaways from, I believe, what is this, the final practice that with
final open one for us? Yeah, we don't get anything else. And again, we just saw the first 4 periods. So the first thing was, obviously, we got a chance to see a little bit of scrimmage action from the threes. And one takeaway from that is we saw Chris Burgess playing inside a D tackle. We thought that move was eventually going to happen. It may not be permanent. It just may have been like for this period. Maybe they were working on some nickel stuff, and maybe he's moving inside for nickels. So it's not something that I want to read too much into, but I think that move is inevitable. And it's actually one that I'm normally I'm like, why do you always get these DNs that I like? And then you grow them into D tackles. But when you saw how big Chris Burgess had gotten, and it's a good big, it's not like it's not like, oh man, the kid's got chunky. I mean, he is a massive young man. And you're like, dude, he's going to be Riley Mills. He's going to be, in that he's going to be an interior guy real quick. And so we saw him getting a little bit of that action today. Saw Davion Dixon do that. They ran 5-6 plays. Tyler Buckner was the quarterback during that. Jake Tefelsky was at running back. He's a really athletic kid. I mean, you saw him in drills, Trev, number 26. Like when you think walk on, you think like not really athletic and smaller. Jake's a put together kid and a pretty good athlete. He had a run today. They were running outside zone, and Devin Houston was at right guard, and they're running to the left. Well, as you know, sometimes when you run outside zone, you're cut behind one of the backside offensive linemen, and Devin Houston had a really nice block, just kind of a reach block, backside reach block, drove the guy down, washed it out, and Jake read it and just cut right behind him for a big play. So that was impressive. Tyler had a nice little option throw to Jerome Bettis Jr., who was part of that group as well. Bad Framo, Teddy Rizak, really athletic. You know, you could just see it. There was a one play where Madden Framo and Ethan Long came downhill, blew up an inside zone run. That's most of the action we saw today. The rest of it was just guys going through drills. I thought the quarterbacks, actually all the quarterbacks were pretty sharp today. I thought Tyler Buckner, I made this. I said this to Tim O'Malley. We were sitting there talking as he and I were kind of watching the quarterbacks at the same time. I said, I'm really impressed. Like, it's noticeable how Tyler's arm strength is not nearly as good as the other three quarterbacks. Like, just the power behind it. He never had like a cannon. But one thing I've noticed from Tyler Buckner during fall camp this year is his ball placement has improved a ton from when he was the starter back in 2022. As he's not going to start. I'm not trying to make this a thing. I'm just giving you practice observations. And you know, what Tim and I were talking about is like, look, if you get in a situation where tragedy happens and you've got two of your top two quarterbacks are out, I think they turn to Tyler Buckner. So it kind of matters how that's going to be. And you know, he looks good. He's competing and is throwing the ball real well. He just doesn't have the arm power that the other guys had. I thought Kenny had a solid day. CJ threw with the most zip. He had the more impressive throws again in routes on air. You know, just keep that in mind. It's routes on air. But it was another day, Trev, where like the last time we were there was a few balls hitting the ground. This time I didn't see any throws hitting the ground. I thought the guys threw the ball really well, pretty sharp. Receivers look good. They got their legs back. Remember, I think the last practice I was talking about how they had a little bit of camp arm. Today, you could see they've kind of pushed through it. A lot more zip on the ball from the quarterbacks, and so natural part of the process. But that's what I saw from them. The big thing linebackers, DBs, D-line were just kind of going through their normal drills. One thing I spent a lot of time today was on top of the quarterbacks and receivers was watching. Oh, running back also, Nolan James Jr., really impressive athlete. Like Trev, he's going to play. He's going to play this year, I think. He's going to be hard to keep off the field. Just a really well-built kid, really athletic. Aeneas Williams is out there. He's got a big old – actually, it's his right arm. He's got a big old brace on his right arm. You couldn't miss Aeneas. He had royal blue cleats and royal blue gloves on today at practice, so you could definitely notice him a bit. But it's all Nolan James or Jabron Payne. So everybody else except for Keedron was out there. Everybody was able to go through everything, and so we got a chance to see that. Nolan James impressed. Of course, Jadarian and Jeremiah. Honestly, at this point in time, folks, I spend very little time watching Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. Like that, yeah, they look like studs. Don't care. I want to see what the other guys look like. One observation I did see from practice today, Trev, that caught my eye is I've been hearing a lot lately about Gerby Lambert's been getting a lot of work at right guard because Sullivan Absher's was a little bit dinged up. And when Jagasol got hurt that day, I wrote an article saying here's the top candidates to replace him. And Absher was the top candidate. But my next guy was Gerby Lambert because I was told then that they're going to work him inside at times and see how he does. Well, he's done really well. I'm going to give one little nugget that I'm going to talk about. I'm going to do an intel piece later today. I was able to talk to a few people that were at the scrimmage on Wednesday night. And one of the things I was told is that Gerby Lambert was a monster during run, including one play against the first team defense where he just took a defensive lineman and drove him like 4 or 5 yards off the ball. Now, your concern might be, was that bad for the defensive line? Guys, that's how it is in fall camp. If one guy has a great play, it means somebody else got dominated on that play. But to do that against this D-line is that's the whole point, is that there was obviously some success. And so that was good to see. I'll be shocked at this point in time if Gerby doesn't start at right guard barring injury. And the other reason that I think that's true, that's more evidence of that, is we saw them cross-training Sullivan Absher today at left tackle and right guard. If Absher's your right guard, he's your starting right guard, why are you working him at left tackle? Like, that's kind of my question. Will Black again all day today at left guard. So it's just whatever. Just don't even want to have that conversation today. But that was something I noticed. And I got to tell you, man, every time we've seen Billy Strouth in practice so far this year, he just plays with a little bit of extra fire. And you say, well, it's just drills. Exactly. I'm comparing it to what I've seen from him in the past. His quickness off the ball, his pad level, and like you just hear him just like when he's hitting guys. Like he's playing with some fire. Even now, over 2 weeks into fall camp, he's still kind of hitting that. Hitting the pads like that. They were working on 2-man combo blocks today. Joe Rudolph was his typical kind of fiery self, but you could see he was a lot more, that's what I want. That's what I want. That's what I want today. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I've talked to you guys a lot as we've reported on, Joe Rudolph and how he engages with the offensive linemen, like not happy a lot of times with what he's seeing. Today, you could see him he was obviously more pleased with it, but like, it's like, okay, they're starting to get it. They're starting to get it. And, really focusing on pad level. But there was a play where they were working on a reach and Billy came across and just ripped his head in front of the defensive, or it was one of his offensive linemen, but lining up as defensive lineman, and just ripped his head around, got power, got push, while the tackle was kind of just working laterally. And Gerby did the same thing. So I feel really good about the guard position right now, which when Jagasol went down, you're like, okay, there's talented guys there, but how are you going to be with what we've seen from Sully early in fall camp, and then what we've now seen from Lambert? However that works out, I feel really good about the right guard position. The only concern I really have is I have not got a chance to see them do a lot of pass pro, so I don't know how much that part of it's improved. But little shakiness at times from Ashton Craig snapping. So I think just getting back into the flow of things with him is really one of the final things. But I was really pleased with just the force and the athleticism and the power that the offensive lineman showed. I've seen this drill done a million times, so you can kind of tell when guys are going through the motion or guys are getting to the right spots, and when guys are just really driving people. And like early in fall camp, you'd see Rob Delaney, who's the guy that helps Joe Rudolph out. I don't know if he's an analyst or a GA, but he was really focused. He focused a lot on getting the D linemen to the linemen who are lining up as defense to be forceful, do this thing. And he didn't seem to be upset about how they were performing. And he tends to do that if they're not performing. So when they're getting driven off the ball, you're just kind of like, dude, okay, that's what we want from the offensive linemen. So those are things that I'm kind of encouraged by from the offensive line. Run game wise, I feel pretty good about where they are. Pass pro, I just don't know because I haven't seen them do any pass pro since the first day of practice. But at least I'll say this. I feel that when this team goes out there on August 31st, one thing I think they're going to be able to do is run the football. After that, we'll see, because we just haven't seen it. We haven't seen them do anything except some one-on-ones, I think the third day of practice or something like that. But I like the way they're competing, even in combo drills. This is a period where it's just like, okay, let's work on technique. They're just coming off with some fire. And when they're doing that in that period of time, man, you have to think they're really bringing it when they go to more team stuff. So that's really my takeaways from practice today, Trev. I don't know that there's a whole lot else to – I don't know if there's a whole lot else to see from a 4-period practice where they didn't do any one-on-ones and, D linemen, we're watching them do the same drills they've done forever and not a whole lot else to say on it. They didn't do any special teams today, so not a whole lot else to say on it.
Well, it's good news about the interior of the offensive line. I mean, you and I have talked about before the last couple seasons. It's kind of been one of the more up or down areas of this offensive line unit. And so hearing that that's starting to get shored up is some promising news. Well, Brian, let's kind of pivot here a little bit and about the most opposite way of going from talking about Notre Dame football. Let's talk a little bit about what happened with Michigan today. As everybody knows, there's been this ongoing scandal and this ongoing investigation going on with Michigan. And then today at noon, it was finally released what the sanctions would be against them. And this has been a hot topic of conversation. So to give everybody a little bit of a review, I have pulled up here what all is going into some of these sanctions. So off rip, they're going to be fined about $20 million, which is a pretty hefty fine in terms of like college football fines from everything that I've read. Excuse me. That is, Brian has said it on this show before, and that if you want behavior like this to stop, if you really want to make an impact for repercussions, what does the NCAA and other programs hold near and dear to their heart? Their pocketbooks. And that's kind of where the punishment has to go to. So they got fined a hefty amount of money. I think the breakdown is like it's a $50,000 fine plus 10% of the budget for the football program, then a fine equivalent to the cost of 10% of the scholarships awarded in Michigan's football program for the 25-26 academic year. There's a lot of fine-tuned details about it, all encompassing. The final number comes out to around $20 million, all things considered. You have a 25% reduction in football official visits during the 25-26 season. You have a 14-week recruiting prohibition on recruiting communications in the football program during the probation period. And then there's a handful of like individual people that got highlighted in these sanctions. Connor Stallions has an 8-year show cause order restricting him from all athletically related activities during the show clause. Jim Harbaugh has a 10-year show cause order. Again, some of these are, in my opinion, the individual penalties are pretty light considering Connor Stallions is no longer coaching in the NCAA. Denard Robinson has a 3-year show cause order. He's already out at Michigan. Jim Harbaugh is the head coach of the Los Angeles Chargers. Then Sherrone Moore has a 2-year show cause order during which he is suspended from a total of 3 games. Basically, they added an additional game to his already self-imposed 2-year suspension. And there's a lot of talk about how that third game isn't even going to come until 2026, sometime in the week 3 to 4 period. And so in a nutshell, that's pretty much what Michigan got hit with. So we just wanted to talk about it. It's breaking news. And obviously Michigan has been a hot topic of conversation, especially amongst Notre Dame fans and other football fans in the Midwest here, Brian.
So if I'm going to be honest about this, I think the penalty was smart by the NCAA. And I know that a lot of the focus is, the penalty, it's like they got a smack on the wrist. And my whole thing is, you don't ban them from the postseason. I've said this before, because if you ban them from the postseason, you're literally punishing people that had nothing to do with this. The entire coaching staff is gone, except for Sherrone Moore, who's dealing with some penalties. A lot of the team is gone. That was part of the sign stealing. I mean, the years where that was just running rampant with no consequences was 21 and 22. 23, I think they stopped it at a point. Now, I think they had it at the beginning of the year, but once it became out there and he was removed from the program, they stopped it. Like, I don't think they were stealing signs when they beat Ohio State in 2023. I don't think they were stealing signs when they beat them in 24 Alabama and Washington in 2023. I don't think that was still going on. And people say, vacate titles and wins. Why? I can't say how dumb I think it was when Notre Dame got wins vacated and then say, but they should have done what? That's not a punishment. That's a fan punishment. You punish the fans for that because now they can feel good about it. It does nothing to the team. The players that were on that team in 21, 22, and 23 are not going to be like, oh, man, the wins, the work we did doesn't matter anymore. They're not going to care. They're not going to give the title back. I mean, we all watched them beat Washington. We all watched them beat Alabama. What does that really do? Nobody cares about vacated wins. It's zero punishment. It just makes fans feel better. The way you hurt a team, don't let them recruit, take money away. I think it was Pete Thamel that said that the total amount of money that this could equal is over $20 million. That was a hefty penalty before schools also had to pay $20 million in revenue to their student athletes. This is, to me, a very harsh punishment. What the show call does for Connor Stallions is he can't coach college football anymore. He was never going to coach college football. He was the college football coach for Notre Dame. For Michigan. He was a guy that just did some things for him on the side. It's like, okay, he's going to keep coaching high school football. So I agree that other than Sherrone Moore, it doesn't really impact the people. But it definitely hammers Michigan. Plus, they're on 4-year probation, which means you do something else like this, you are screwed. That's when you get the hammer. So I don't really think that this was the slap on the wrist that people think it was. And the final thing is this. The whole talking point that Michigan fans have hung on to for 3 years, we didn't cheat, is gone. Michigan admitted they cheated when they suspended Sherrone Moore for 2 games this year. Self-imposed 2-game suspension. And now this comes out, and the report makes it very clear that, what rules did they break? This report makes it very clear they violated these rules, and they very clearly did what they were accused of doing. That was a big thing. And then the other part of it is you just hit them with an 8-figure punishment. Because, see, people just see the 50,000 and they can't think past the 50,000. Look at the percentage of postseason revenue. Ban them from the postseason. Why? Why ban the players on the team now from playing in the postseason when they weren't necessarily a part of what was going on? Why does Wink Martindale have to and Chip Lindsey have to be punished for things that happened when they weren't here? Don't let Sherrone Moore coach in the postseason then for 4 years if you want to do something like that. But again, now you're hammering people that had nothing to do with the thing that you are in trouble for. Like, imagine if the NCAA came out now and found out that the Notre Dame academic scandal was this thing that was coordinated from the top of the university down, and it was this massive cheating scandal in the football program, blah, 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 blah. And they said Notre Dame can't play in bowl games the next 2 years. We'd lose our minds. But none of these kids had anything to do with that. So why are you all – this has always been my punishment is they would punish players that had nothing to do with the thing that went on, meaning you can't play in the postseason. You can't do this. Well, why are you punishing all these kids and the vast majority of them had nothing to do with it? Hit them in the pocketbooks. So basically what this means, Trevor, is Michigan can't get postseason revenue. Do you know how much these schools like need the postseason revenue to survive? Now in this era where you've got to pay $20 million a year just to pay your student athletes, this is a big deal, in my opinion. And this is how you hit them. And then the other part that's not being talked about enough, Trevor, I'm trying to pull it up from Greg Thamel. It's this: you have a 25% reduction in football official visits during the 25-26 cycle. That hurts you a little bit too. Now, I'm curious to see what that does that include all of 2026, which means they have a 25% reduction in how many kids they can have on campus next summer as well. That's going to sting a little bit. And then the other part of it is a 14-week prohibition on recruiting communications during the probation period. Is that all 4 years of the probation period? I'm curious about that. That's another thing that hurts. And here's why that hurts them. Number one is if they do what they're supposed to do and not have communication during that window, that they're going to be falling behind on recruits. If they do cheat on that, the hammer comes down, because that's why the probation matters. You say, well, what does probation mean? Probation means it's just like if you get arrested, you go to jail, you come out of jail, you're put on probation. This means if you do something wrong again during your probation, you're going back to jail. And that's essentially what this means. So if they violate these recruiting things, and this is really where they got to be careful. If you violate those things on the recruiting window, you're going to get hammered for this, in my opinion. So that's kind of where I'm at with this, Trev, is I think those things plus the money, that is kind of coming down with a bit of a hammer. And that's why I think this is a much harsher penalty than people realize. They were never going to violate wins. And Bill Bender wrote about this. He said they couldn't violate the wins even if they couldn't vacate the wins even if they wanted to, because this punishment, apparently, so what Bill wrote, this punishment does not fall under – it's like you can't just hand out punishment that you want. Like you can't – if you're a judge and someone comes forward, you can't say, hey, I want this guy, to be hung upside down by his feet and, tarred and feathered because of what he did. Well, yeah, okay, that make you feel better, but you have no ability to do that, and it's going to get overturned on appeal because that's literally not an option for you to do this to a person who got arrested for speeding. You know what I mean? I'm giving you a life sentence for, going 55 into 35. You can't do that. That'll get overturned like that because it's not a penalty that's in front of you. And I'm just kind of using examples. Obviously, judges that may not be actually legally true, but I got to have a feeling it will be. It would be the case. But when I look at this from what Bill has reported and what I've seen, I think it was Dan Wetzel, maybe it was Pete Thamel also reported, is that based on the NCAA rules, vacating wins was not under the potential punishments. They didn't have the ability to go to that as a punishment. Okay, fine. I didn't care as much about that anyway. When they vacate wins, they don't give you the win. Ohio State can't go and say, hey, we're actually 3-1 against you the last 4 years. No, you're still 0-4. It's just those don't count on Michigan's all-time record, whatever. And if you're someone who cares about, them ranking number one in win percentage, okay, that would be something because they'd still count the losses. But y'all, they lost like 3 games in that period, like 2-3 games that period of time. It's not going to impact them all that much. So I just think actually that this is something, Trev, and I want to get your thoughts on this as I've kind of ranted for a little bit. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on this because I actually think this was a relatively and I think this sets a precedent. Hey, you don't want to get signed. I mean, schools are all around the country complaining about, hey, we got to figure out how to raise enough money to do all this. And you go out and cheat something like this, and all of a sudden you lose all this recruiting visits, you lose all the postseason revenue that you're going to get. All of a sudden, hey man, like that's a deterrent, in my opinion. Like, do we really want to go down this road? Because if we get caught, boy, we're not going to be able to afford to have a program that runs with any kind of effectiveness. So I actually think this was a very I think this had some teeth to it. Could they have been harsher? Yeah, sure. But I think this has some teeth to it.
Yeah, I'm completely on board with the financial fine. I was talking to a buddy about it yesterday, and he brought up the vacated wins or a postseason ban, and I echoed a lot of the same points that you said. It's like, look, man, Bryce Underwood had nothing to do with Connor Stallions leading some sign stealing operation in 2022. That's not on him.
Neither did Justin Haynes or
it's just I think that's neither here nor there. I think that just would make fans feel better. And I don't even know if it would make fans feel better, just them doing that. I think it would make opposing fans feel better that Michigan fans are upset about it. But, I mean, if you look at it realistically, if Michigan has to vacate those wins, it doesn't really bother me that much. It doesn't affect me as a Notre Dame fan. It doesn't affect other people as, like Alabama fans or Georgia fans. Ohio State fans will get to say, haha, now there is an asterisk, but they're going to say that for the rest of time anyways. It doesn't matter whether they got penalized for it or not. But the one aspect of it that I'm not in love with is like the individual player or the individual people listed out on it.
Sure.
I think it was just kind of unnecessary. Not saying that it should have been harsher. You can't really have much of a harsher thing than a decade-long ban for their former head coach. I mean,
I just don't know what else they would have been able to do. Like, I don't think they can fine Jim Harbaugh's NFL salary for what, you know what I mean? Like, that's the only problem is that legally I don't know what they could have done to people who are no longer coaching football. And the one guy that is coaching football, they suspended him for 3 games over 2 years.
Yeah, that's the aspect of it that I think could have been harsher. Maybe not making anybody resign or step down as a head coach, but basically acknowledge it. We've said a lot that, nobody's on the staff anymore. It's a completely different team, completely different staff, except for the person that's kind of at the head of the program now was the only person a part of those cheating scandal operations. And you kind of just gave him a little additional slap on the wrist for the self-imposed slap on the wrist already. Now, I don't know if that was a tip of the cap to, you know what, since you came up front and you admitted to it, we're not going to bring the hammer down on you. But Jim Harbaugh got suspended for more games in season when this first came out. He had a 4-game suspension for this. And Sharon Moore, after it's been there is conclusive evidence that all of this stuff happened, he gets a 3-game ban. Mm-hmm. And one of them's not even until next season. And so I think the punishment on him could have been a little bit tougher, but then we're getting pretty granular with this. As long as it was a hefty monetary fine, I'm okay with it, to be honest with you.
Yep. That's, yeah. So, Wade Garrett asked, hey guys, can you explain a little bit how the limited communication will work with recruits? Is it monitored by the NCAA? That I don't know. I don't know the specifics of what is it. Okay, you can't talk to kids. Is it you can't have kids on campus? Does it mean you can't have any contact whatsoever? Wade, at this point in time, I don't know the answer to that. We'll have to research that a little bit more. But that's done by your compliance office. I mean, the schools get busted all the time for those type of things. And you also have to worry that you get turned in by another school. If Ohio State and Michigan are recruiting the same kid and the kid's talking to Ohio State's coach and he's like, hey, so-and-so coach so-and-so at Michigan was telling me blah, blah, blah. You don't think the Ohio State coach is like, uh-oh, hey, our compliance office, I just was talking to this kid and he said, they might wait until the kid picks another school or something like that because you don't want to, screw things up with that recruitment. But absolutely that's how that stuff gets that's how that stuff absolutely gets handled. But they're also, if you have a good compliance officer, this stuff is going to be there. Plus, nowadays, everything is digital. I mean, you can't really erase stuff anymore. I mean, you think you can, but you can't. You can say, I'm delete all my text messages before the FBI comes over my house. They're still going to be able to find those text messages, believe me. So I think that is kind of how that is. There's different ways where you could get busted for that. It's like, how do some schools get kind of busted for too much practice in the offseason? It's because a disgruntled player or a disgruntled coach that you fired narcs on you. And that's how you get caught. Same thing here. Like, hey, just so you know, you want to fire me? All right, cool, Coach Moore. I'm going to go ahead and give a little call to the NCAA and let them know. And then I now have the phone records and the DMs to prove that I was communicating with them and that we were doing this. And then all of a sudden, bam. That's how it is.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're talking about 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old recruits.
Yeah.
Not saying anything about illegally being contacted by Michigan. Not a chance. Yeah. I mean, that'll get out. That will get out for sure.
The other thing I'm unsure of is, what does a show cause mean for Sharon? Like, what does the show cause for 2-year show cause mean for Sharon Moore?
A lot of it is, and this is a pretty elementary explanation, so if anybody in the chat knows a little bit more, feel free to insert this. But from everything that I read for him, since he's still working there, one, it'll be hard if he ever wants to leave. It basically is a big old red flag on your resume that you're going to have to file just mountains of paperwork to try to get this person hired into your program, okay. One. And then two, there's a lot of recruiting restrictions. Now, it didn't clarify how strict of his own personal restrictions are. But like some common ones in the past have been like, you can't take home visits as the head coach. And you can't, it has something to do around your communication. But the bigger one is, if he ever wants to leave Michigan to go somewhere else, it's going to be nearly impossible for him to get hired.
The one thing I do know is true that was different when Harbaugh got suspended, because remember that Harbaugh coached the entire week and then was there and then went to the hotel. I'm pretty sure about this, Trevor, that this suspension for him is he can't coach during the week. He can't be around the team during the weeks he's suspended, which is a little bit different. I'm pretty sure that's accurate, which is a little bit different than what happened with Harbaugh. So if he's out 2 weeks, he's gone. He can't be in meetings, he can't be in practice, he can't do that. I believe that was part of it as well, which is how it should have been, because suspending a coach just for a game but letting him prepare the whole week of practice is not as harsh of a penalty as you'd think it is. Because a lot of times by the time you get to Saturday, the game plan's put in, the players are prepared, the coaches know exactly what you want done in certain situations, and you go out there and have success.
Yeah.
Not the case in this situation, if I'm correct in that being done. So I wonder if I'm very curious of how does the perception of Michigan change this season? I don't think it changes them at all. I don't think you're going to go see the FanDuel odds for Michigan kind of go down and all because of this, but I do think this is going to have a bigger impact on them than people think. I do. I think the recruiting stuff is going to matter more. People say, well, it only matters if you don't use all your official visits. Well, you got to remember, we're in an era now where kids can take as many official visits as they want. And so, yeah, you have 25% less. You have to be a lot more choosy about who you're going to bring to campus during that period of time. So I do think it matters.
Agreed. Yeah. Perception's going to be huge.
Yep. Got a super chat from Kevin C. Hey, Brian, met you down in Atlanta with Jeff. Hope all is well and keep up the good work. Pumped for the season and this roster go Irish. Kevin, yeah, man, I met Kevin. We went out to Roots Chris, and my buddy Jeff was there with his wife, a beautiful wife Heather. And so I got a chance to meet him. It's great to hear from you, man. Hope you're doing well. And I believe, if I remember correctly, Kevin is also served our country. So we appreciate you very, very much for that, my man. Always want to get love to our soldiers, but appreciate you, man. And it was great meeting you guys down there. Hopefully, we get a chance to meet up again, but yeah, Trev. So that's kind of it for the Michigan stuff. And
good deal. Good deal. Well, that wraps up part one of today's show, but don't go anywhere, folks. We are getting ready to do a deep dive into the Big 12 conference, wrapping up our conference preview before the season starts. But you guys know what to do. Be sure to hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed to this channel. Hit that notification bell so you know whenever we go live. But the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards, at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All righty, we're getting into part 2 of today's show on the Irish Breakdown podcast, brought to you by FanDuel. Brian, today we are talking about the Big 12 Conference. We're wrapping up our conference preview series. And before we go through and we break down our predictions of who we think finishes where, we're going to talk a little bit about this conference as a whole, similar to what we did the last 3 conferences we previewed. We're going to give an overview. We have a little bit of a tidbit about the transfer portal here that we also wanted to touch on with the Big 12 because it's hit them in a big way. And then we're going to dive into some superlatives before we dive into our conference predictions. But Brian, Big 12 conference is kind of difficult to look at in a vacuum and decide, okay, who are the top teams here, who's going to compete for what, because really it's up in the air. But when you look at this conference as a whole, do you think it's a little bit more of a deep conference? What makes it so challenging to play in the Big 12?
I think the big thing with the Big 12 is what makes it an entertaining league is, and there's some other reasons, but this is one, is there are no elite teams. And I don't know, except for maybe Arizona. We'll have to see how their season goes. I don't know if there's any like awful teams either. I think Arizona might be. Even like, I've got a couple teams like low in my bottom 12, 16, and I know you have some teams down there. I don't think they're terrible football teams. I think they're being hindered by the fact that, like with West Virginia, for example, with Oklahoma State, for example, and with UCF to a degree, not as much as the others, like their rosters are completely brand new because they lost 20-plus portal guys. They added 30-plus portal guys. And you're just like, I don't know what they're going to be, but you look at the players they added, and there's some talent there. They're just not like this is a terrible football team, which is, I believe, to be at the bottom of the Big Ten. You've got Maryland, who's just an awful football team. Purdue's a pretty just awful football team. You look at the ACC and you look at some of the teams in the bottom there, and you're just like, this is just a really bad football team. Like it's just not going to be good. I think the Big 12 and the SEC don't have that. I think that the worst team in the SEC is Kentucky, and you're like, dude, they got a number of pros on their team. They've got too many big holes where other teams don't have big holes, and they're just going to struggle to win games. But that bad Kentucky team last year almost beat Georgia and beat Ole Miss on the road. Like Arizona's not going to have that kind of success against the top of this league. And you look at like Maryland, they're not going to be doing that in the Big Ten. They're not going to be like, oh my gosh, did you see that Maryland upset Penn State and almost beat Ohio State? You see what I'm saying? So like the bottom is just worse in a lot of these leagues. Maybe Arizona's that way, but I don't really feel that about the other league, which means on any given Saturday, teams 15, 16, 14, 13 can beat anybody in the league because also they're not terrible, but the 1, 2, 3, and 4 in these leagues is not as good as the 1, 2, 3s, and 4s in other leagues. The 1, 2, and 3 in the Big 12, I think is pretty good this year, in my opinion. It's not as good as Penn State, Ohio State, Oregon. It's not as good as, Alabama, Georgia, or Texas. It potentially is as good as Clemson, SMU, and then whoever the heck finishes third in the ACC, whether it's, and that's just my prediction of the ACC. You wouldn't even include SMU in that top 3. Is it as good as those? I think you could make a case outside of Clemson that the 2 and 3 in the ACC maybe could be that. But I also would say is, there's teams got to prove a lot. So I just think the depth of the league is what makes it really entertaining. The bottom is better relative to the top than other teams in the league. If the top 4 in the Big 12 would struggle let's say they went to a 16-team playoff, just for argument's sake, and the winners of that tournament gets to play Notre Dame, the independent, number 1 team, just for argument's sake, because I'm just trying to make a point, not exclude Notre Dame from anything. So it's a 16-game, 4 teams from each conference. I think the Big 12 teams would struggle and it was like our number 1 plays your number 1, like sort of like a round robin type of thing. Our 4 plays your 4. I think the Big 12 would struggle. But what would be entertaining is if you took a bottom 4 tournament. And I think the bottom 4 in the Big 12 outside of maybe Arizona, who might be the really bad team in the league this year. I think those would be more entertaining games mean, Oklahoma State was terrible last year. They beat Arkansas, who had a winning record, and beat Tennessee, who went to, that that's what I love about this league, Trev, is on any given Saturday, anybody can beat anybody in this league. And then I think the middle's pretty strong. So I think this is, if the Big 12 can have this type of season be their floor, they're going to be okay. Because I think it's going to be an entertaining season. It's just, I don't know that they have like a title contender in the league this year. And that's what makes them not as good as the SEC and the Big 10. I think the debate comes down to who's third. Is it the ACC or the Big 12? I think you could make an argument, and I will make the argument, that the Big 12 is the third best Power 4 league this year. The ACC has the best team of the two leagues in Clemson, but I think 2 through 13, 14, I would say you remove the top teams from the equation. I think the Big 12 is a much deeper and just overall better conference than even the ACC. What are your thoughts on that, Trevin? Just your overall thoughts on, just the Big 12.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's a very difficult conference to evaluate because, like we've said before this offseason, it's more of a level playing field compared to the other conferences. Look, you look at the Big 10, and up at top, you have Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State. I think that's fair to say. At the top of the ACC, you have Clemson, and then arguments for 2 through 4. And then at the top of the SEC, you have Alabama, Georgia, Texas. If you were to say anybody outside of those top teams that I just listed off were going to be in contention to win the conference within those respective conferences, I think you'd kind of have a, not so fast, man. I don't know if South Carolina has the horses to compete against Alabama for the title. They could, but there's a lot of if this happens. Same thing in the Big 10. USC has some pieces, but I don't know if they have the horses to compete with Penn State and Ohio State and Oregon, and I just don't know if it happens. You can look at the Big 10 conference and look at the top 7 teams, and I guarantee you if I put something up on the message boards about, I think Kansas State wins the Big 12. I think Baylor or TCU or Arizona State, and the list goes on and on. There's going to be people that see that in any certain scenario. It's like, I could absolutely see that team doing it. So when I was putting together my lists and when I was putting together my conference breakdowns, I got into the discussion of why this is the case. Why is it just the Big 12? Because we talk about how they don't have any of the elite teams, but there's like 8 to 10 teams that are almost level playing field. And I called Brian about it to see if we could talk about it on the show today. And it's because for all the talk about how the transfer portal has just disparaged the SEC, and that's why they had a down year last year, and that's what even the playing field, I beg you to go look at what the transfer portal effect was in the Big 12. Brian, I don't know if you've looked up the answer to this, but I'm going to just toss this out there. People in the chat can answer it too. How many players just this past offseason in a 16-team conference in the Big 12, how many total players do you guys think left from the winter portal and the spring portal, if you just had to throw out a number?
Whatever the average of 20 players per team is, that would be my guess.
Yeah. Well, the average, and I rounded up a little bit because you can't have half a person enter the transfer portal. The average is 28 players a team entered the transfer portal. The Big 12 lost 440 players to the transfer portal just this past offseason. Mm-hmm. And they're supplementing it again through the portal. I mean, you look at teams like Colorado lost 33 players to the portal, and then they brought in 33. West Virginia lost 51 players to the transfer portal. They're bringing in 54. UCF lost 43 players to the transfer portal. They're bringing in 41. So one of the reasons why this league is so tough to evaluate is because it truly could be a brand new team every single year. And yes, I know a lot of these like 40 plus transfers are people that don't play a whole lot, but there's some impactful transfers that have left this league. It's not just, third string tight end, second string kicker, fourth string nickel. I mean, you go and you break down who they lost. Some of these players were all starters or going to be starters that were replacing some impact players. I mean, Nikai Hill-Green left Colorado. He was one of their starting linebackers last year. He's now at Alabama. Jordan Young was one of Cincinnati's best corners. He's now at Arkansas. Cam Calhoun was at Utah. He's now at Alabama. Dazon Stribling was at Oklahoma State. He's now at Ole Miss. We talked about Dakario Davis yesterday, that 6'4" corner that was at Arizona. He transferred to Washington. Miami's new starting center that I was pretty high on when we were doing the O-line previews, he came from TCU.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you were talking to me about Carver Willis, that offensive tackle out of Kansas State. He's now at Washington. Tyler Onyedim, who is at Iowa State, multi-year starter for them, is now on the Texas A&M defensive line. So it's not just they're losing their third-string quarterback or, redshirt freshman, fourth-string running back. They're losing impactful players in the portal. That's what I think makes it so difficult for the Big 12.
That's why I'm so tired of hearing the crying from the SEC, like, oh, the portal's killed the SEC. No, the portal hurt Bama and Georgia. Like, what would LSU's team look like if there wasn't a transfer portal? Like, they'd be screwed because Brian Kelly walked into a situation where they had like 30-something dudes on the roster. He wouldn't have been able to rebuild the way he has. And I mean, still not there yet so far, but like, imagine if you took like Jaden Daniels off that team and some of the other transfers they've had, you'd be in a much tougher situation. It's just, Bama and Georgia can't stock the roster the way that they have in the past. And that's kind of, the frustration of hearing all that. I mean, there's teams in the SEC that have greatly benefited from the transfer portal. Ole Miss greatly benefited last year from the transfer portal. And the Big 12, I think, has been hit harder than any other league by departures from the Big 12, to your point. If you go to the Big 12 and shine, a lot of guys are leaving. And remember when Tennessee lost Nico to UCLA? What did we start hearing? They're going to go after Avery Johnson. They're going to go after Josh Hoover. They started trying to poach Big 12 quarterbacks. Now, fortunately, the Big 12 was able to hang on to those because that's the other part of the Big 12 I'm excited about, Trev. Is this might be the deepest quarterback league in college football, at least proven quarterbacks. I mean, you look at this league, Trev, and you talk about the proven quarterbacks that they have in this league. And I mean, you're talking about, we've talked a lot this offseason about like Josh Hoover from TCU, who I had in my top 10 quarterbacks. We talked about how Spencer Robertson from Baylor was in that conversation as well. He wasn't quite in it. Sam Levitt is a guy that I believe we had in our top 10. I think I had Avery in my top 10 as well. But so you got Sam Levitt, Noah Fafiti from Arizona. You got Spencer Robertson from Baylor. You have Salter transfers in from Liberty. It's Caden Salter, right? From Liberty, transfers into Colorado. If he doesn't pan out, 5-star Julian Lewis is going to step up and take over for him. So, yeah, but Caden Salter is a proven player. Iowa State has Rocco Beck. Kansas brings back Jalen Daniels. Kansas State has Avery Johnson. I mentioned Josh Hoover from TCU. You look at the kid from Texas Tech, Morton. He was a good player for them last year. Baron Morton, he comes back. He's another guy that Tennessee tried to poach when they lost Nico. Go ahead, Trevor. What were you going to say?
Houston picked up Connor Wegman.
Yes. Houston picked up Connor Wegman, and Utah picked up the Dampier kid from New Mexico State, who's a 2,000+ yard passer, 1,000-yard rusher last year, and he followed his offensive coordinator to Utah.
Mm-hmm.
And then so like you just look at that part of it, Trevor, and you're like, boy, this league is. And then there's a redshirt freshman taking over at Oklahoma State who I like a lot, Zane Flores, who beat out a guy that started some games last year and then beat out a transfer who then left during the spring for the starting quarterback job. So, like, there's really good quarterback play in this league. And I think it was Andrew Gilmore also said in the board earlier, something that's not discussed a lot about the Big 12, there's a lot of excellent coaches in the Big 12. I mean, I'm just going alphabetical. Look at the job Kenny Dillingham did last year. Tremendous job. Katani Salaki's done a heck of a job at BYU. Dave Aranda kind of up and down, but did a nice job last year. Deion Sanders turning Colorado around in 2 years. Willie Fritz, incredibly underrated and underappreciated coach, did a tremendous job at Utah. Matt Campbell's an excellent football coach at Iowa State. Lance Leopold at Kansas is a great football coach. Chris Kleiman at Kansas State won multiple national champions. Well, actually, Lance Leopold also won multiple national championships at the Division III level. Chris Kleiman won multiple national championships at North Dakota State at the FCS level. Mike Gundy's a Hall of Fame coach, in my opinion. Sonny Dykes had TCU in the national championship game 3 years ago. And you look at Kyle Whittingham and the job he's done. And then Rich Rodriguez rejoins the league this year. Like, this is a loaded league when it comes to good head coaches. And then there's some other guys that have got to prove themselves. We'll see what, we're going to find out a lot about Joey McGuire this year. Scott Frost is a question mark at UCF, but like last time as a UCF, things went pretty good when he was there. Took over a team. I think they were like 0-12 his first year. And by the end of his tenure, they were talking about, that's a team that I think they went undefeated one of his later years. So, yeah, I think this is a much better league than people give it credit for. And I think part of that is just that's an ESPN-driven agenda to tamp down a league that's not on, with them. But I think this is a much better league than people give it credit for. I think it speaks to the fact that people just look at the top of the league and that's how they evaluate the quality of a league. And I think that's misguided because I think when you don't appreciate how deep a league is, you run the risk of missing out on just how good a league actually can be. And I think that's where the Big 12 doesn't get enough love, in my opinion, Trevor, for what they were last season.
I agree. And name recognition also just doesn't help them out. Lack of name recognition, I guess you could say, just because it doesn't have the national prowess of a Georgia or an Alabama or an Ohio State or a Clemson. So I understand it, but don't let that get in the way of your opinions, not yours specifically, but of your opinion of what the Big 12 is going to do this year, because it's going to be a fun league, man. Brian, you've been saying that for months.
And it was a fun league last year.
Yep.
I mean, just look at the postseason. Arizona State falls behind Texas, 17-3, comes all the way back, takes Texas to overtime. And everybody talks about good Clemson is. Why are we not talking about how good Arizona State looked against Texas last year? They were far more competitive than Clemson was, and they returned they lost Cam Scadaboo, and that's about it. A couple linemen, but they return a lot. But why did they not get the love? Because it's Arizona State. It's not a big name program. It's not that sexy program. But Iowa State beats Miami in a bowl game last year. I mean, I understand maybe that doesn't happen if Rocco Beck doesn't play, but the most devastating loss that the Big 12 had in a bowl game last year is Colorado losing 36-14 in their bowl game to another Big 12 team. BYU beat them in a bowl game. So it's look what happened to Colorado. Yeah, they got beat by another Big 12 team. So I think this is an underrated league, and I can say that while also admitting that the underrated aspect is partly also legitimately due to the fact that there is no powerhouse team in the league. That's also a fair thing to say. I just think that distracts by the overall quality of this league. And I think it's what makes it fun and just really excellent coaching. That's going to be the next thing that the big leagues try to poach out of this league is some of the coaches.
Agreed. Well, Brian, let's get into some superlative talk, man. We've been doing this with every conference breakdown. We talk about offensive player of the year, defensive player of the year, rookie of the year, and then we also talk about coach of the year. I've been starting it off, Brian. What do you think? You want to switch it up? Do you want to go first for your offensive player of the year?
No, we're going to keep it rolling, man. You got to go with yours.
All righty. Let's do it, man. My offensive player of the year is quarterback Sam Leavitt. And I love how he ended his season last year. From November 2nd to the playoff game against Texas, he ended the year with 16 touchdown passes and 2 interceptions. And in 2 of those games, he didn't have Jordan Tyson, his 1,000-yard receiver. I'm a big, big fan of what Sam Leavitt is going to do. I don't know if I'm buying into as much of the hype of, he could end up in New York at the end of the season and, he's a top 3 quarterback in college football. But in pertains to this conference, I think Sam Leavitt is due for a big season. Compound that on the fact that they're going to need him too. We kind of joked about, I think they only lost Cam Scadaboo, which is true once we get into the Arizona State breakdown, but you lost Cam Scadaboo.
Right.
You lost 50% of your offensive prowess from last season.
Didn't have Jordan Tyson in the bowl game or in the game against Texas. It should be reminded of people as well.
Yep, absolutely. Didn't have him in the conference championship game or in the playoff game against Texas. And Sam Leavitt was still able to light it up. I think he threw for 3 touchdowns in the conference championship game without Jordan Tyson, his number one go-to guy. And so I think he's going to be due for a pretty big season. Going to have to step it up, but I really, really liked how he ended the year. I think he ended the season with 22 passing touchdowns. 16 of them came from November 2nd to the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he's going to take a big jump.
Yeah, he's got a little gamer to his game as well as Trev, where there's games where you look at him play and people who are obsessed with like certain numbers, they're going to like, well, his yards per attempt was this and his yards per play was that. And I'm like, yeah, but did you watch him make plays? Like his numbers against Texas weren't sexy. He completed 52.2% of his throws, 222 yards on 46 attempts, 4.8 yards per play. Didn't play great, but if you look at the highlight reels, you're like, dude, he made some plays in that game. Key for him is just going to be becoming a little bit more steady in his second year. That's going to be the big thing for Sam Leavitt. I think you nailed the offensive player of the year in that you picked a third-year quarterback that's poised for a breakout season. However, my friend, I think you picked the wrong third-year quarterback poised for a breakout season. I'm being sarcastic. I think Sam Leavitt's a really good player. I'm staying consistent, and there's no reason to change my mind now. I think Avery Johnson is going to have a real big breakout season. Everything you said about Sam Leavitt, I kind of feel the same way about Avery Johnson. It's his first year as a full starter, had some impressive moments last season, had some inconsistency last season, something that's going to have to get improved upon. When I watched the Arizona State-Kansas State game last year, I mean, you saw kind of the best of both of them and the worst of both of them. And I think that Sam Leavitt obviously got the better of that deal because he also played for the better team, I think, in that game. But when I watched Avery play last year, Trev, you saw stretches last season where it's like, okay, he's got some things to learn. But then I also saw how he finished the season. 8 touchdown passes and 1 pick in his last 3 games, but then he was around 50% completion rate. Like, those are part of the things. I thought he started to use his legs a lot more down the stretch, which was important. And I think at times last year he tried to be too much of a sit in a pocket kind of guy. And I want to see him, let her rip a little bit more. But you just saw the flashes from Avery Johnson last year of, boy, this kid's going to be real special. And, and then, of course, like I said, he has the 15 for 28 performance with no touchdowns and 2 picks against BYU last season. And then you see the Oklahoma State game. The very next week, he goes out and throws for 259 yards, throws for 3 touchdowns, rushes for 2 more touchdowns, and a blowout win over Oklahoma State. I thought bringing Kansas State back against Colorado was an absolutely brilliant performance. Went on the road and had a blowout win over West Virginia. So I thought the kid had some really great moments. I think more consistency from him this year is going to be a big part of it. I like the portal pickups they did also in the offseason, Trevor, to give him more weapons to throw the ball to. I think that's another big part of this for me. When I look at Kansas State, is they have J.C. Brown coming back. DJ Giddens was a big loss. I think that's also part of the reason that I'm going here. You're going to be like, wait a minute, hold on. Losing a really good player is something, yes, because I think that they have Joe Johnson, I believe, is the backup running back. Joe Jackson, excuse me, is the backup running back's name. With Dylan Edwards, I don't know that either one of those guys are going to be the workhorses that DJ Giddens was. So what I think you're going to see from those two, and Joe Jackson's big enough to do that. He's not DJ Giddens. And Dylan Edwards is not a guy you want to give the ball 15 to 18 times a game to. I know that they did that in the bowl game. He had a ton of touches in the bowl game. But I don't know that that's something that you want to do because he had a month to rest before that game, and then he had a month to rest after that game. They gave him 18. He had 18 carries for 196 yards and 2 touchdowns. Also caught the ball 2 times. So 20 touches. I don't know that that's what you want to do every game. But what that game showed me against Rutgers, it was a pretty solid defense, is when Avery and Dylan are both cooking, and Dylan is the lead back because DJ Giddens I don't believe, played the bowl game. That was a dynamic duo. I think Joe Jackson gives some size. J.C. Brown is a big-time player. And then when you look at what they got in the portal, I think they surrounded him skill player-wise with some weapons. Now the question is going to be, how does the offensive line look? That's now more of what my question is than before. And, yeah. Yep. We're going to see how that goes. Yep.
We got a little sneak peek into your Kansas State preview. Yeah. That's good stuff. That is good stuff. Defensive player of the year for me also belongs to Kansas State. And I'm going with linebacker Matt Romaine. He is on the Nagurski watch list, the Buckus Award watch list, the Bednarik Award watch list. He led the team last season with 96 tackles, 7.5 tackles for a loss. He's all over the field, man. 96 tackles in 13 games, 3 forced fumbles. Where I think he's going to have to take his game to the next level is I think he's going to have to get a little bit better against the pass because he's a more traditional, like, run stopping type of linebacker. He's no Kyle Lewis. He's not a Rasheem Biles, but who he is a leader of that defense, and he's all over the field, and he's starting to rack up the preseason accolades, very similar to what some of Notre Dame's defensive stars are doing. So all those watch lists that he's on, the Buckus Award watch list, same one that Drake Bowen's on. And so I'm going to be interested to see what he does this year, but I'm high on Kansas State this year. Defense is going to have to maintain a certain level of play, and I think he's going to be at the center of that. So my defensive player of the year is Matt Romaine from the Wildcats.
Okay, I was going to go with him as well, but I'm going to just throw another one out there of someone else I considered. So that way I'm just like, oh, I agree, Trev, move on. The other guy, there's a couple D linemen that were real disruptive last year that I consider, including the Corleone kid from Cincinnati. But another guy that I think could be in consideration this year because I think he's going to be even more productive in the pass game is I really like Xavier Alford from Arizona State, the safety. Very productive player last year, had over 80 tackles. Let me pull up his official numbers last year. He had let's see here. He finished last year with 85 tackles, 2 interceptions, and 5 pass breakups on the season, and had three breakups and 3 picks the year before. He's a guy that I really like that I think could be in position to have a bit of a breakout season this year for Arizona State. Like, breakout is in the pass game. Run game wise, he's already proven to be that. But I think he's a guy that I really like as a potential sleeper player to be in line for that award. The other guy, the Corleone, the D tackle from Cincinnati, is another guy that was linked to some big time programs. If he jumped in the portal, he might be, an impact player. His numbers last year were not like blow you away numbers. I could see him having a bit of a jump this year. He's more of a big, thick run stuffing type. He's a guy that I've heard some people talk about. The problem is his style of play. I don't know if it's productive enough to win an award like this. You just need a little bit more disruptive numbers, but that's where I'm at. That's where I'm at in my Defensive Player of the Year award.
I love it. My Rookie of the Year in this conference, I'm going with Julian Lewis, the young quarterback from Colorado. I know that Deion is playing this quarterback battle pretty close to the chest. Man, last thing that I had heard is he had yet to announce a starter between Caden Salter and Julian Lewis. I think at some point they're kind of gearing him up to take over. But what have we seen from Deion Sanders-led football teams? There is a lot of emphasis put on quarterback play. A ton. Going to get more into that in my Colorado preview here in the next segment. But Julian Lewis is an extremely talented player. And I think somebody that can help fill the void of losing a Shedeur Sanders. He's going to be a couple years away from obviously being able to do some of the things that Shedeur did last season. But he's a true freshman. I think this year he's going to be able to burst onto the scene. And there's going to be multiple moments throughout the year where Colorado fans and Deion can sit back and look and say, okay, we've got our guy. We've got our guy for the next 2 to 3 years after 2025. And so my Rookie of the Year pick is Julian Lewis.
So you finally went with a true freshman. I'm curious how that one's going to be. I kind of was leaning towards that as well. I'm going to kind of go with an outside the box one with a guy that I don't even know is going to necessarily be a major factor. But I just have a feeling at some point in time this season, Lincoln Cure, the freshman tight end at Kansas State, is going to jump in and be a major weapon for that team. Obviously, they've got some experienced tight ends on that team. Obviously, Garrett Oakley is projected to be the starter. Will Swanson's a redshirt senior. So there's some players there. But Lincoln Cure is a different kind of cat than what they have at tight end. And Notre Dame recruited him, loved him. He just wasn't all that interested. They would have loved to have had him as the second tight end in the 2025 class with James Flanagan. But I think he's a guy that I looked at as well, Trev. But Julian Lewis is a good one. I think if things go south for Colorado early, and I think they can, I think they just make that move, and he's going to be allowed to do that. There's not a lot of true freshmen in positions to really thrive this season. few redshirt freshmen. But yeah, I like Lincoln Cure as a true freshman, and I like the Julian Lewis pick as well.
To bring us home with superlatives, we got Coach of the Year, and again, I'm dipping back into Kansas State. I think they're geared for a really good season this year, and we'll get into that. But I have Chris Kleiman, Kansas State's head coach, as Coach of the Year. Look, it kind of goes into you start breaking down, matched with my prediction for the team, compared with who else could be in contention for the award. I think he makes the most sense. I mean, per my predictions, Baylor doesn't make too much movement as far as their conference record. TCU doesn't really either. Baylor doesn't that much. But I have Kansas State making quite a bit of movement within the conference, and I think he's going to be able to tie that all together with all the points that you talked about earlier, Brian, with Avery Johnson, getting Dylan Edwards in there. They have an experienced defense, one of the most experienced rosters coming back in the Big 12, which honestly says something with how much transfer portal fluctuation there is in this league. Chris Kleiman being able to keep his unit together, I think speaks volumes about the culture at Kansas State. I think he's going to put together a really good season for him. So I have Coach Kleiman, the Wildcats, as my Coach of the Year.
You're really frustrating me today, Trevor, with taking all my answers. You know what? You should have let me go first. No, I'm there. It really came down. There are three coaches that I considered this year, and I considered Chris Kleiman. I considered Sonny Dykes. I also strongly considered Kyle Whittingham because I think Utah has a big bounce back season. If if the season goes the way that you and I think it's going to go, Chris Kleiman's hard to go against in this regard. But if there was a coach that I could see challenge him at the end of the year, I think it could be Kyle Whittingham. And part of it is just because how bad Utah was last year. And I don't know how much people are going to reward him for the kind of bounce back season. But if Utah does bounce back the way that I think they're capable of, then I think it could be him. And so there's like I said, there's a lot of good coaches. I think I don't know that Kenny Dillingham can win it unless they just run the table.
Yeah.
This season. I think Dave Aranda's maybe a guy to keep an eye on. I don't think Matt Campbell's going to have a chance to win it just because I don't know how much better they can be this year, and I don't know how that's going to be viewed. If Joey McGuire's as good as people think they are, I think he might get some consideration. I think with him there'd be some pushback to the way they kind of bought that team. And I have a friend of mine. He's like, hey man, I don't know what to say to this Penn State guy. And he said the only reason Notre Dame is winning is because they're buying players. And I was like, bro, just tell them them's the rules. You know what I mean? Like that's the rule. But I know they just went out and bought players. Well, yeah, that's called doing your job. That's kind of how you do it nowadays. But I could see some pushback, a little bit of pushback there. But and then some of the other big name coaches, I just think their team is not going to be that good. So I'm going Chris Kleiman. Sonny Dykes is in there. Dave Aranda maybe is in there. But if I'm wrong on that prediction, I think it's going to be because Kyle Whittingham leads Utah back to the top of the Big 12, or actually to the top of the Big 12. I shouldn't say back because they've never been in the Big 12. But if the second year in the Big 12 is a whole lot better than the first year in the Big 12, I could see Kyle Whittingham putting up a battle for that as well.
To wrap up this section of the show, let's get into a little bit of the FanDuel odds here. And what they basically tell us is they think that Kansas State right now are the favorites, tied with Texas Tech and Arizona State. I think these betting lines, Brian, kind of reinforce what we've been talking about now since we started breaking down the Big 12. This is the closest margin of top 6 teams that we have seen per FanDuel's odds in the odds to win the conference championship. In the Big 10, it was close between like Ohio State, Penn State, and Oregon, and the SEC was close between Georgia and Texas. But looking at these, with there only being 100-point spread of odds of difference between the top 5 teams, with the first 3 teams being tied, this is pretty crazy, and I think speaks to how close the league is.
It does. There's no other league like this, Trevor, and this is kind of the point of what we said at the beginning of this, of the Big 12 breakdown is, like, look at yesterday. We had, let's see if it'll pop up when I click on these, but we did Big 10 yesterday, and look at those odds. Like, there's 3 at the top, and then there's this giant drop off between 4, 5, and 6. We did the SEC on day 1. There's 4 teams at the top, and then a giant drop off between number 5 and number 6. But then let's go back to the Big 12. And with them, it's like there's a closer drop. Number 6 is as close to number 1 as in a lot of leagues, number 2 and 3 are to number 1. And to your point, it just speaks volumes about the fact that there is no clear top team in this league. There isn't one. I think at least one team from this list is going to vastly underachieve this season. I know who my prediction is, but I could see it being several teams. Because the other thing that's interesting about the league this year, Trevor, is every team has holes. And that's why there's no elite team. And you guys talk about Kansas State. Like, why are they not an elite team? Like, you guys have said multiple times that they might have the most dynamic backfield in college football. Do you not really believe that? No, I absolutely believe that. The problem is their O-line sounds a lot like Notre Dame's O-line last year when it comes to, like, it's not quite as bad, but, like, there's a lot of new faces and a lot of guys that haven't played a lot of football. There's some holes on the defensive side of the ball. Every team has these holes that they have to figure out how to fix. And so I could see that. And, Arizona State, I think Arizona State's going to be really good again. But this is a team that 2 years ago went 3-9, and then in year 2 they went 11-2 in the regular season plus a Big 12 title game. Like, are they as good as they were last year? Are they somewhere in between where they were in year 1? Was last year kind of a fluky year? I don't know. Let's see how it is. And I think that's what makes this league so flippin' entertaining. A team like Utah, who was terrible last year, is 5. TCU was 5-7 last year. They're in the top 6. So I absolutely just love about this league, Trevor, if you're a Big 12 fan, I know that you don't have Texas anymore and Oklahoma anymore and all that. I mean, first of all, you didn't have Texas for that long anyway. They're in the league for 30 years? They were a Southwest Conference team all those years. But, man, this is it at least keeps you entertained. It's just like, are you not entertained? Like the scene from Gladiator. Like, look, you're good. Your team, the national champion's not going to come from your league. Just deal with that. But sit back and enjoy what is going to be an absolutely fun year of college football following this league. And that's the thing, is we're so obsessed with the playoffs and the national championship that sometimes we can miss out on. Yeah, I know none of those are great teams. There's no Ohio State in the league, no Georgia, there's no Bama, there's no Notre Dame. But, man, this is a fun league with some really good coaches and some really good quarterbacks. And if you can't enjoy that, then you're just, man, you're missing out. You're missing out.
Well, I think that's a good way to end this segment, Brian. But folks, do not go anywhere. We're getting ready to reveal our conference predictions for the Big 12. But before we get there, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. Anybody that loves Notre Dame and college football as much as you do. But the best way to support what we do here is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, getting into the final part of today's show on the Irish Breakdown podcast brought to you by FanDuel. Brian, it is now time to reveal our Big 10 standings. Big 12 standings. Yep. Did I say Big 10? Well, there's Big 10, there's Big 12, but the Big 10 has 18,
Trev,
but the Big 12 has 16.
I'm not busting your chops.
Man.
I had 30 cards yesterday of Big 10 predictions that said SEC predictions on them. So I'm not busting chops. I'm not judging. I'm just like, okay, what's Big 12? So everybody knows we're talking Big 12.
Big
12
/16.
Yeah.
But Big 12. And we're going to do it the way that we did. We're going in blocks of, I believe, 5. Is that how we're
going to go 5, 5, 4, 2. Like we did with the ACC and actually with the SEC, excuse me. Because ACC has 17, Big 10 has 18, and the ACC and the Big 12 have 16. So we're going to go 5, 5, 4, 2. A reminder, this is not a power ranking. This isn't a ranking of who we think the best teams are. We actually go through, we make predictions for the entire season, and then we come to this conclusion. And tomorrow at 1 o'clock, we're actually going to go live tomorrow on Saturday at 1 o'clock, and we're going to do our Notre Dame season prediction, and then we're going to follow that up with our college football playoff predictions at the end of this. So that'll be fun. But Trev, when you start off, I think when I've talked to, this shouldn't surprise anyone. I've talked a lot about Arizona kind of coming into this breakdown, and I just think this is a team that's really going to struggle. And they weren't very good last year. And they had Ted McMillan. They had Noah Fafita last year, and they still weren't good. I think they had sort of that big year under Jed Fish. He takes off, and they lose a bunch of players. They go 4-8 last year. And the thing about their 4-8, Trev, it's not like they're a play here or play there. Their losses last year, they lost by 24 to K-State, 6 to Texas Tech at home, 22 to BYU, 27 at home to Colorado, 5 at home to West Virginia, who wasn't even that good last year. They lost by 44 at UCF, 21 at TCU, and lost by 42 to Arizona State. Their wins last year were a 22-point win over New Mexico, a 12-point win over Northern Arizona, a 13-point win at Arizona, which got them to 3-1, and it looked like, okay, they're going to be all right. And then they didn't win another game until November 15 when they beat Houston 27-3. They weren't that good last year. They've got 3 offensive starters coming back, I believe. Their defense returned some guys, but their defense was not good last year. They did lose, I would argue, their best defensive player. We talked about him yesterday when we did our Big Ten preview going to Washington. I just think they're going to struggle. I do. And they have a shot to not win a single game based on just looking at their schedule. I think they're going to win one because, as I said, any team on any given Saturday can beat anybody in this league. So I think they at least get a win or two, but I think they're the clear worst team in the league. Next up for me is going to be the UCF Golden Knights. Similar situation, Trev. They weren't that great last year. Scott Frost comes back. That's going to be an interesting tenure to watch him coach. I know things went great the last time, but remember, before Scott Frost built them into a powerhouse in the AAC, they were 0-12 in year one of his rebuild. And when you look at UCF this year, just like last year again, they were 4-8 team, lost by 13, 11, 6, 3, 13, 4, 10, and 14. More competitive than Arizona, but still not that good. They've got 1 starter coming back on offense and 3 starters coming back on defense. They're completely rebuilding. And I think it's going to take at least a couple years for Scott Frost to get that thing turned around. And then when you look at their schedule this year, Trev, they've got to play at Kansas State, at Cincinnati, at Baylor, at Texas Tech, at BYU. And because it's a 9-team league, so there's just some years where you're going to have more road games than home games. And then their home games are against Kansas, West Virginia, Houston, and Oklahoma State. So I don't think their schedule does them any favors either. Next up on my list is the Kansas Jayhawks. This is another team. This is one of those teams where I look at Kansas, and they're one that I'm not quite sure what to think of Kansas this year, Trevor, because there's a couple things I like about this Kansas team. Number one is I think Lance Leopold's one of the best coaches in college football and doesn't get enough credit for it and has done a pretty good job there. This is another team that struggled last year at 5-7. They're the team that you could look at and say, okay, man, they're a few plays away from being better. They had a 6-point loss at Illinois, a 3-point loss to UNLV, a 4-point loss to West Virginia, an 11-point loss to TCU, a 4-point loss to Arizona State, a 2-point loss to Kansas State, and they got blown out by Baylor at the end of the year. But they're another team, 3 starters coming back on offense, 3 starters coming back on defense. The good news is that of their 6 returning starters, 5 of them are linemen, 2 offensive linemen, 3 defensive linemen, and the 6th one is Jalen Daniels, a quarterback. The reason that I don't put as much in Jalen Daniels coming back and why I don't know that Kansas will be able to have sort of a bounce back season is, number one, is we just haven't been able to see Jalen Daniels stay healthy. That's the unfortunate thing is he's entertaining when he plays and they're a much tougher team to handle and defend when he plays, but he just hasn't been able to stay healthy. And if you look at his production last year, he played 12 games last year, so he was able to play all the games, but he got banged up several times, and he just wasn't as good. 14 touchdowns, 12 picks last season, and then he ran the ball for 439 yards. And whereas 2 years ago when he was really good in 2022, he averaged 5.4 yards per carry. He was down to 4.7 last year. So I just don't know that he's the same guy, like with all these injuries he's kind of dealt with. If I'm wrong and he's now a full year removed from all those big injuries and he breaks out, then, maybe they might be better. But in a tough league with the schedule they have, I think it's going to be tougher for the Jayhawks to finish near the top. Next is Colorado. When I look at this Colorado team, Trevor, again, this is a completely rebuilt team. I think this year is going to look a little bit more like what we saw from Kansas and from Colorado the year before, where they're going to struggle against what I believe to be a pretty competitive schedule. We're going to find out, I'll say this, pretty early on if we're wrong about Colorado. Because they open the season against Georgia Tech, and it's at home. And then 2 weeks later, they go play at Houston on a Friday night. 2 weeks after that, they get BYU at home, and then October 4th, they get at TCU home, and then October 11th, they're home against Iowa State. That is not an easy start to the season. And then, of course, they got to play at Utah, at West Virginia, at Kansas State, and then they get Arizona State at home, and Iowa State at home, and BYU at home. So their home slate is some of the better teams in the league, potentially. So just too much turnover on offense, too much turnover up front. And, look, their whole team was built around the talent of Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter. And as much as I like, Caden Salter and Julian Lewis, they're not going to run that offense the way that Shedeur did. Just isn't. I had some questions about Shedeur leadership-wise and things like that, but this is a kid that was, I think, a 70-something% completion, passer last season. I don't know that the offensive line is going to be any better than it was last year when Shedeur would complain about not getting time to throw. So I think this team is going to have a tougher time this year. And we also saw, even with Shedeur Sanders at quarterback last year, and Travis Hunter at receiver, the Heisman winner, they struggled against some of the better defenses on their schedule. And so that's why I have Colorado at 13, and then number 12 for me is the West Virginia Mountaineers. This is a team that is almost them and Oklahoma State are almost impossible to evaluate as a team. The players, but they're completely rebuilt through the portal. This is one where I think Colorado, Kansas both have better teams than West Virginia. The reason that I have West Virginia higher is I think their schedule's a tad more favorable. They get Utah at home, they get TCU at home, Colorado at home, and Texas Tech at home. And let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Their road games are at Arizona State, which will be tough. At BYU, it'll be tough. At Kansas, which is winnable. At Houston, which is winnable. And at UCF, which is winnable. So if you look at their 5 road games, 2, 3 of them are against teams at the bottom of this ranking. And that's what I think gives them the edge. The fact that they get Colorado at home is, part of this. And then they got to go on the road to UCF, who is not that good, and they have to go on the road to Kansas. So Colorado gets 3 of these bottom tier teams, and they have to play Arizona State, but they don't play Iowa State. They don't play Kansas State. I just think they don't play Baylor. I just think their schedule is a little bit easier. If we were doing a power ranking, I'd have West Virginia lower than the 2 teams that are beneath them. But when you just look at their record, I think that's going to be the issue for me. So that's my bottom 5 in the Big 12, Trev.
My bottom 5 is so weird because there's so much potential fluctuation that it could be, and I just don't know what that looks like. Like Brian said, we go through and we predict win-losses for every single team in conference. My teams 11 to 15 have the same amount of losses. It's so up in the air, and it could be either way. A lot of them play each other. But getting into it, my 16th team, I have Oklahoma State rounding out the bottom of this league again. And I don't have them going winless, but I have them rounding out the bottom. Look, when you look at their schedule this year, they have to face Baylor. They're on the road against Texas Tech, on the road against Kansas. They get Kansas State and Iowa State. They are helped out by the fact that I don't believe they get Arizona State. It looks like they also don't get – that actually might be one of the few top teams that they also don't get TCU. Mm-hmm. They also get Baylor. So I think their conference schedule isn't going to do them a whole lot. Again, it's like what we talked about before, heavily relying on transfer portal players because they had to be. They brought in 41 after losing 28. Mm-hmm. Losing 28 isn't too bad, but they don't have a single returning starter on the offensive side of the ball. So it will be just a completely new look team. Now, with that being said, that could be a positive. They went 3-9 last year with that offense outside of Ollie Gordon. I don't know if you can hang your hat on and be like, but they got 6 returning starters. And it's like, well,
But what if your starters sucked?
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm not naive to the fact that it could go the other way. But when I just look at it in a vacuum of not a single returning starter, that is 11 guys that you have to get gelling as a machine. Mm-hmm. Quarterback is a question mark. Unfortunately, they did return somebody with experience on Oklahoma State from last year in Talon Chatron, but he suffered a torn ACL in the spring. And so he's out for the year as well. And then on the defensive side of the ball, they only returned 3 starters. I think they have a lot to replace. I have faith in Mike Gundy because of his experience. I just think inexperience of being a cohesive unit on offense matched with just so much turnover and rotation for them. I think it's going to be their demise, unfortunately. So I have Oklahoma State at 16. My number 15 team, I have the West Virginia Mountaineers. They were 5-4 in conference last season, but again, absolutely decimated by turnover. First year under Rich Rod, they had to bring in 54 transfer portal players to supplement the 51 losses that they had. Their offensive line last year played 7 different guys throughout the season, and all 7 of them are gone. And so they're going to be a completely new rebuild offensive line. I like the Rich Rod hire.
Mm-hmm.
It's just going to, yes, absolutely. They are a couple seasons away from that coming to fruition. They're going to be transfer portal reliant for a little bit until he starts building up the high school recruiting pipeline.
Which, Trevor, interestingly, he has not shied away from saying publicly a lot. He has not hidden the fact that I need to redo this roster. It's like, dude.
Which I do. It is. But that's what that's why I think he was such a great fit at West Virginia. He can just come in and just be like, hey, look, man, this is where we're at.
Yeah.
I'm not bringing in a 5-star recruit this offseason, okay? Like, we're going to be supplementing through the portal for a little bit. Now, the one bright spot that they do have coming back on offense, Jaheim White at running back, he's a good back. He returns. Defensively, they return one starter from last year, and they're going to be under a new regime. So, going to be interesting to see what they do. Their schedule's tough. They're on the road against Kansas, on the road against BYU. They're on the road against Houston, on the road against Arizona State, and their home schedule doesn't get much easier because they host Utah and they host TCU. So West Virginia's schedule, some aspects of it are favorable, but because of the roster being what it is, makes it a little bit more daunting.
Yeah. The question you have to ask yourself, Trevor, is how much faith do you have in Rich Rod's system?
Yeah.
And that's partly what went into our difference.
Which is fair. I get that.
Right.
And like I said, my team's 11 through 15. 15 could easily be 11th.
100%. Dude, 15 could be 7. When it's all said and done. You just got done saying that Oklahoma State has 1 returning starter. Like, they could finish last, or Mike Gundy could do what Mike Gundy does, and they could finish in the top 7.
Yeah,
like,
it's crazy.
It's going to be such a fun league, man. I cannot wait to watch some Big 12 football this year. And I think the first game of the year is a Big 12 game.
Mm-hmm.
It's Iowa State and Kansas State next Saturday in Ireland.
Oh, yeah.
Which I'm excited about. But anyway, please continue.
Good old Farmageddon, baby. We get that overseas in Ireland. I'm ready for it. Number 14 on my list is the UCF Knights. They went 2-7 in conference last season. I see them doing something very similar. It's year 3 under Scott Frost. Can he turn it around? Questions at quarterback. They have a current 3-way battle for quarterback, and it includes Taven Jackson, who was the IU backup from last year, and then Ja'Cory Brown and Cam Fancher. They have to replace R.J. Harvey at running back. Won't be easy, but Miles Montgomery is the guy that will be stepping in for him. It's going to be a completely new rebuild offensive line outside of their right tackle, Paul Rubelt, but they have a rough conference schedule, which I think is another factor that leads me into putting them at 14th. They're at Kansas State, they're at Baylor, they're at Texas Tech, and they're at BYU. One of the tougher road slates in the Big 12, and they're doing that with some pretty inexperienced linebackers. Will be heavily relying on transfers. Their edge rushers return, which is going to be pretty promising for their defense, but it's going to be a new interior of the defensive line. Their secondary is going to be interesting to keep track of this season, but I have UCF as my 14th team. My 13th team, I have the Cincinnati Bearcats. This was one of the teams that I just don't know how to evaluate, if I'm being completely honest with you. And last season, they go 3-6. They returned Brendan Sorby, their starting quarterback, but they lost their top 3 wide receivers and their running back from last year. One of the portal players that they picked up that I'm going to be keeping my eye on is Cyrus Allen from Texas A&M. They're going to need him to kind of live up to, okay, you were an SEC recruit, you were a higher level recruit. We need you to be all of that and then some here at Cincinnati. The O-line, they had to replace some pieces with some transfer portal guys. One of them was from Ball State and the other one was from South Dakota. I'm going to be very interested to see how they perform at this level. We've talked a lot about how competitive the Big 12 is. Now, the Ball State kid, he has FBS experience, it was at Ball State, but there are some teams in the MAC that give you similar, looks to what you could potentially see in the lower level teams here in the Big 12. But those adjustments, I think, are going to be key for the offense. Then you look at what they're doing on defense. They brought back some key pieces. You mentioned him earlier, Dante Corleone, which is a pretty cool name for a defensive player. Dante Corleone, that's sweet. But they bring him back. Linebacker Jake Goldday is coming back. But one of the transfers that I talked about that left the Big 12, one of the many transfers, Cincinnati lost their number 1 and number 2 cornerbacks from last season to the transfer portal, not to graduation or not to the draft. So they're both gone. Doesn't help that their schedule includes Iowa State, Baylor, at Utah, BYU, and on the road against TCU either. And so I have Cincinnati as my 13th team. And then rounding out my bottom 5, I have Houston as my number 12 team. They brought in Connor Wegman to start a quarterback. They went 3-6 last year. Their offense was terrible last year. They ranked 132nd in the country in points per game at 14 points per game. That's rough. Now, the head coach is making some necessary adjustments to do that. They brought in Slade Nagel, who was Willie Fritz's offensive coordinator when they were both at Tulane, and you combine that with an experienced SEC quarterback in Connor Wegman, who has 2 years of quasi-starting experience in there, they could do something. Now, all 5 of their starting offensive linemen in some of the reports that I've seen are transfer portal players. That is a unit that I don't feel comfortable when it's predominantly made up of transfer portal guys. We've talked about that before. Wide receiving cores, I'm okay with. Offensive line, it's a little bit more iffy, I believe it to be. Mm-hmm. And then defensively, both of their starting linebackers are coming off of serious injuries. They were kind of expected to be the heart and soul of that defense. But you have Corey Platt, who tore his Achilles in back-to-back seasons, and Jesus Mercado, who transferred in from Tulane, is coming off of a knee injury. So the heart of that defense is going to be, if they can stay healthy, improved. But you're banking on a back-to-back Achilles injury linebacker and a linebacker transfer coming off of a pretty significant knee injury. Leaves some question marks. And then their schedule includes Texas Tech. They're at Arizona State. They get TCU, and they're on the road against Baylor. So I have Houston as my number 12 team.
Good stuff, Trevor. I'm going to jump in right now. I got the Texas Tech Red Raiders there at number 11. This is a team that there's a lot of talk about how good Texas Tech is going to be this year. They're a preseason top 25 team. A lot of people love what's going on at Texas Tech this season. And honestly, to a degree, I don't hate it. I don't have a huge problem with it. I think one of my issues why I have a little bit of pushback on Texas Tech is, number one, is we still don't know if a team can completely rebuild the way that they need to through the portal. And they're thinking that the team that will is going to be Texas Tech. Maybe it is. I just need to see a little bit more. And I like Barron Morton at quarterback. I think he's a gamer. I think he's a gritty kid. I think you look at his numbers last year, passing for over 3,300 yards, 27 touchdowns, 8 picks. Those are all good numbers, but his QB rating was only 139.12 because he only averaged 7.2 yards per attempt. A lot of quick game. And when I look at losing Josh Kelly was huge. If you remember getting Josh Kelly, he was one of Cam Ward's top receivers at Washington State in 2023. This guy that Notre Dame looked at, he's gone. He was a 1,000-yard receiver last year. And the other big loss that they have is losing Taj Brooks is a much bigger deal than I think people are talking about. And while I like Quentin Joyner quite a bit, he's not the every down back that Taj Brooks was. Taj Brooks was a very different kind of back from Quentin Joyner. Quentin Joyner is a guy that's going to be able to be a big play weapon. We talked about, going back all the way to November, Trev, when we were previewing that game, how Woody Marks and Quentin Joyner were very good 1-2 punch for USC last year as far as being those slashers that could go make big plays. And, Quentin Joyner last year averaged 7.6 yards per carry. It's pretty darn good. Only had 63 carries. The only game he carried more than 10 times was against Utah State and Notre Dame. There's only 2 games of his career where he had more than 10 or more carries a game, and he had 10 in both. His next highest total was 7 last season. And in that game, he only had 19 yards against Nebraska. Taj Brooks, these are his carries per game: 27, 17, 27, 32, 21, 25, 30, 25, 31, 28, and 23. That was his carries per game last season. 286 carries, missed 2 games, and averaged 5.3 yards per carry, and was a workhorse for them last season. Also caught 28 balls out of the backfield. So unless you're going to change your offense a little bit, I don't know how they're going to be. They did get Reggie Virgil from Miami of Ohio, another guy that we previewed last year, getting ready for the Miami of Ohio game, to come back and be with Caleb Douglas. And so the hope is that that Reggie Virgil can kind of do for you as a transfer what Josh Kelly did. I don't think Reggie Virgil's the same kind of player. So we're going to have to see kind of what he's capable of. But their receiving core should be good. I have some question marks with their offensive line, 3 new starters from the portal. Their entire defensive line is a transfer portal players. And I just don't know how that's going to work, Trevor. And David Bailey's a very talented player, but he's a guy that's been getting hyped since his freshman year about being this tremendous player. But he's a guy that at times has not been able to stay healthy. He's a guy at times that Stanford really only felt comfortable putting in certain situations as a pass rusher. He had 8 tackles for loss last year, 7 sacks. That's pretty good. Year before that, 6 tackles for loss, 5 sacks. Year before that, 8.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. And now all of a sudden he's going to go to Texas Tech and all of a sudden be a star player, and stay healthy and give you 400-500 snaps a game. I just don't see it. Romello Heights, another player that they got out of the portal. He's a good football player. I don't think he's a game changer. And I always worry about those guys that just, to me, kind of come across a little bit as mercenaries. And, this is a kid that did pretty well at Georgia Tech last year, 6.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. He was at USC the year before that. He was at Auburn the year before that. I mean, this is his 4th school in 5 years. And so I'm just not a big fan of that type of player. So when I look at at Texas Tech, maybe they're what everybody thinks they're going to be. I got to see it first, Trevor. And I think Texas Tech will have some big wins this year, but I think they're going to have some losses. And here's the final piece for me with Texas Tech. They got to play at Utah, at Houston, at Arizona State, at Kansas State, and at West Virginia. And their home games are UCF, should be winnable, BYU, Oklahoma State, and Kansas. So their road slate is not easy this season, Trev. And they get right to it. Their first conference game on September 20th is at Utah. Then they have a bye, then they're at Houston. So, I mean, I think we'll have a pretty good idea. If they're 4-1 or 5-0 going into that home matchup against Kansas, I'm a believer. If they're 3-2 and they've started 0-2 in the league, then I'm like, this is exactly what my concern was. They're learning to be a team because you have a bunch of new players. And so that's a little bit of my hang up. But I want to remind people of this, like Trevor said earlier. The difference in between my number 11 team and my number 6 team is not great in this league. It's not great at all. And I do think this is the floor for Texas Tech. I don't think they're going to be any worse than this. And the other part is there's some teams above them that I just think are going to be better. Next for me is the Houston Cougars. Love what Willie Fritz is doing. I won't spend too much time on Houston. They struggled a little bit last year win-loss-wise, but you know what? I really liked watching that team play, Trevor, because even when they were losing, they were competing. You just watch them play, and you're like, this is a Willie Fritz coach football team. Watched them lose to Oklahoma, and they lost by 4. They battled their tails off. Got beat real convincingly in back-to-back games. They got beat in 2 games in a row against Cincinnati and Iowa State, 54-0 combined in those 2 games. What do they do the next week? They come out and beat TCU on the road. It's like they just the horses aren't there yet, and I still don't think they're there yet. One thing that helps Houston a little bit this season, though, Trevor, is I do think they have a pretty favorable schedule. They get Colorado at home. They get Texas Tech at home. They get Arizona at home. They get West Virginia at home. And they get TCU at home. Their road games in conference are at Oklahoma State, at Arizona State, at UCF, and at Baylor. And I've always said, if you're going to play the best teams in the league, you'd like to get a lot of them on the road, because if you're going to lose to them on the road. That's kind of what's happening with Houston's schedule this year. So that's why I have Houston a little bit higher. When I put my ranking together based on win predictions, I didn't feel great about this one because I could see Houston being a little bit lower than this. But this is kind of where it goes and how it played out. But I like the job Willie Fritz is doing. They're going to compete. They're going to battle. He did a nice job. Did a nice job getting some players out of the portal. They got Connor Wegman at quarterback. I think he's got a chance to kind of to have a bounce back season. Just some of the pressures off him. My concern is they have a pretty much a rebuild offensive line with portal players. I think three or four of their returning starters on the offensive line are going to be guys that came from the transfer portal, which is always something that concerns me a little bit. Number 9 on my list is the Cincinnati Bearcats. Trevor, you broke down a lot about Cincinnati already. Having a veteran quarterback coming back helps them. I think their defensive line has a chance to be pretty stout this season, and it's not just because of Dante Corleone. The Cyrus Allen was a really good player 2 years ago at Louisiana Tech, and I think he went up a little bit too high of a level to Texas A&M, and now he's back at a level that I think is more of his sweet spot at Cincinnati, and I think he's going to benefit from that. They also got Tawee Walker, who's been a pretty good player in college football. He was at Wisconsin a few years ago. He had some success there. Talented player, just hasn't been able to put it all together. But he had a 500-yard season in 2013 at Oklahoma. He had 864 yards and 10 touchdowns last year at Wisconsin. So he's a talented player. He'll fit this league really well. There's a kid they have that I'm keeping my eye on. And if Archer's in the chat today, he's going to remember this kid. Do you remember Evan Pryor? That was a big-time recruit that signed with Ohio State out of North Carolina. Super twitchy athletic player, but he just couldn't stay healthy. And he transferred to Cincinnati last year. He played at Ohio State the year before, didn't play a lot, had a bad knee injury early in his tenure, and just kind of got buried behind a talented room. He was sort of their slasher back last year. He carried the ball for just 56 times, but he had 418 yards, 7.5 per carry, and then caught 15 passes for 181 yards. I could see him and Tawee Walker forming like a really good 1-2 punch at running back this year, like a really dynamic 1-2 punch at running back with a veteran quarterback. They're just going to need those transfer portal guys to step up and be good for them. There's another reason that I have Cincinnati a little bit higher than I probably would have predicted if we were doing a power ranking, and it's honestly it's the schedule, Trev. They get Iowa State at home, UCF at home, Baylor at home, Arizona at home, and BYU at home. It's a lot of winnable games. Their road games are at Kansas, which is a winnable game for them, at Oklahoma State, which is a winnable game for them. Those are two of the teams you and I have in the bottom of our rankings. At Utah will be tough, and at TCU will be tough. And then their non-conference, they play Nebraska in a neutral site game, and then they get Bowling Green and Northwestern State, then a bye week before they got to play Kansas. So that's a team that is going to have a couple wins this year that are going to surprise some people and potentially finish a little bit higher, although I don't see them as a threat. Like, this is close to their ceiling. They're like 7-9 ceiling for me. If I'm wrong on them, it'll be that they are not as good. But good backs, really good D-line, veteran quarterback. And Scott Satterfield's a solid coach. He's been a little disappointing, especially his tenure at Louisville, but he's a solid coach. So I think they'll be a little bit better. Number 8 for me is the BYU Cougars. Trevor, I had a tough time with this one because there's a lot I like about BYU's team. But when you look at their schedule, they've got to play at Iowa State. They got to play at Colorado, at Texas Tech, at Cincinnati. They got to play TCU this year at home, Utah this year at home, West Virginia at home. And just they lost a decent amount from their team last year, but I think the quarterback thing is going to hurt them a little bit more than I thought it was going to, just because I look around and there's just a lot of new faces. They have some good receivers coming back, but their offensive line, I don't know how good that's going to be. I think their defense suffered some really tough losses last year. I just have a hard time seeing them repeat the success they had last season. I don't feel great about this one, having them this low, but that's just kind of when I went through my predictions, Trevor. You know, I had them losing at Colorado. I had them losing at Iowa State. I had them losing at Texas Tech, and I have them losing at Cincinnati. So in order to finish in the top half of the conference, you better run the table with your rest of your home games. And I don't know that they can do that against Utah, West Virginia. Not West Virginia, but Utah and TCU. And I just don't know that you can do that. And the other part is they get UCF at the end of the year. If UCF is going to pull off a couple big upsets, I think it's going to be in November when they kind of start getting a little bit more of what Scott Frost is looking for into their belt. So I think BYU falls back a little bit this year. And then number 7 of the Oklahoma State Cowboys. This is a team that you and I have the greatest disparity of. And the reason why is because neither of us have a freaking clue what this team is going to be this year.
Not
this
a
is
one.
Me, Mike Gundy. That's what, like, this is all honestly what it is for me, Trevor. And I do think their schedule, like, we don't have a freaking clue what this team is going to be because, as Trevor pointed out, and I'm not going to rehash it all, this is a completely rebuilt football team. Completely rebuilt football team. But here's what I look at, Trev. They get all their best opponents at home. They get Baylor at home. They get Kansas State at home. They get Iowa State at home. And they also get Houston and Cincinnati home. So they have a 5-4 home versus away positive schedule. Their road games are at Arizona, who I think is going to be really bad. At Texas Tech is a loss, and then at Kansas. So, like, literally, like, 2 of the 3 worst teams in the league, they have to go play on the road against, which is winnable for Mike Gundy. So part of this is I think Mike Gundy's a great coach. I think Mike Gundy's a guy that's proven to be a little bit of a, when you think you got him down, that's when he kind of, jumps up and bites you a little bit. Last year, there was big expectations for Oklahoma State, and they were a huge disappointment. But it's also the same team last year, Trevor, that beat Arkansas, early in the season last year. And it's the same team that started 3-0 with some impressive wins. They lost by 3. They lost by 3 to Utah. They lost by 3 at BYU. They started getting pounded a little bit more late in the year, but then 8-point loss to Texas Tech. Colorado killed them. TCU killed them. Arizona State killed them. West Virginia beat them pretty convincingly. K-State beat them pretty convincingly. But when you look at their schedule this year, there is no K-State on their schedule. There is no TCU on their schedule. And I just think the teams that are the best teams, actually, they do have K-State on their schedule. They play them at home. But there's no Arizona State on their schedule. There's no TCU on their schedule. And then the 3 best teams they play, K-State, Iowa State, and Baylor, they get at home. So, and I love their young quarterback. And I'm very curious how he's going to develop. But I just have Oklahoma State bouncing back a little bit. Mike Gundy may make me look bad at the end of the year, but I just think this team bounces back.
Well, and to your point, no idea how it could go. I mean, there's no way that I can't look at that prediction and be like, you're wrong because
right. Like, did you see me shaking my head at all? And it's like, what? You have the team I have 7th, 16th. You have them as the worst team in the league, correct? Didn't you have them 16th? Did you see me like push back at all? Because well, dude, I get it. I don't disagree with anything you're saying. There's some guys on that team that I like. They got a kid named Terrell Davis. I think it's Terrell Davis. It might be Terrell. It's Terrill, who transferred from a junior college, and he had over 1,000 yards last year in JUCO, and a really talented player. And they've just got some guys like that I like, and then I love the young quarterback that they got. But a lot of it, Trev, just really comes down to I just think Mike Gundy's going to kind of get this thing turned around. And this is just like a typical Mike Gundy type of team, right? Where it's just like you don't think a lot of them, and then all of a sudden, boom, he just breaks out, and his team is really good. So that's where I'm coming from on that, and that's why I have the Cowboys number 7. But I may look back and be like, dude, how did you have that team number 7? And I'll be like, yeah, I had put too much faith in Mike Gundy, or they're gonna be like, man, great call on that one, because I could see them being higher than this, Trev. Like, there's no team in the league with a greater floor-to-ceiling disparity, and it's not close than Oklahoma State.
Nope. Agreed completely.
Close. Would you be shocked if they finished in the top 4 in the Big 12 this year? Surprised maybe, but shocked. Would you be shocked?
Shocked, no. Right. Surprised, yes, but just beside myself, no.
Right, oh my God. However, if I were to say, hey, Trev, could you see UCF finish in the top 4 or West Virginia in the top 4? You'd be like, I'd be floored, shocked.
Yeah.
But you're not with Oklahoma State. And that's the whole point of what Trev was saying at the beginning, which is I have no clue what to think about this football team. I know the players they got, and there's some good players coming in, but how are they going to pull them all together? Was it all of their starting offensive line, or just 4 of their starting offensive linemen are all new guys? Mm-hmm. Could end up being 5. There's a couple other guys that are in the back, the depth chart that they got. But I like this team more than I probably should, when you consider that they are completely made up of basically transfer portal players. But that's where I'm at.
It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, it will be.
One team I am confident will not be ending up in the top 4 is my 11th ranked team.
Okay.
And that's the Arizona Wildcats. Now look, just per how my win-losses panned out, this is what got them at the 11th spot. This is their absolute ceiling. I would be shocked if they got higher than this. Not saying that to be hyperbolic. It's just you go through and you look at, well, I mean, they went 4-8 last season with Tet McMillan. Noah Fafiti returns at starting quarterback. They brought in a new offensive coordinator, Seth Doge. I think that's how you pronounce his name.
Used to play quarterback. He was a pretty good quarterback, I think, at Texas Tech back in the day.
Okay. But major question marks with pass catchers. Tet individually had a great season, but their best returning guy was their number 2 receiver last year, and he had 323 yards, averaged 9.2 yards per catch, and had 3 touchdowns, talking about Chris Hunter. They have to replace 4 of their 5 starters on the offensive line. Their defense last year was absolutely decimated by injuries. They lost 3 defensive captains to knee injuries. Not defensive players, not, one at linebacker, one is like 3 defensive captains alone to knee injuries. They do return some experience in the secondary, which I think will be interesting, but how their win-loss is panning out. Plus, it also helps that they get 10 conference games this year, which is kind of crazy. I think that'll help them out just a little bit. I mean, it'll either help them out or it will completely drive them down in the rankings. But how I predicted the season to go, I have them finishing at 11th. Not much more to dive into there. It could be significantly lower, though. My number 10 team is the Colorado Buffaloes. And when I look at this team, they went 7-2 last year. I don't think they're sniffing that this year. And to be honest with you, it's simple. They don't have Shedeur Sanders or Travis Hunter. And I know that may seem a little bit shallow of analysis, but look, at the end of the day, we're talking about a football team that cannot run the football. They got outgained on the ground in every single game they played last year except for 1. And most games it wasn't close in terms of rushing yard comparisons. Look, they can get, Caden Salter, and I can be high on their freshman quarterback all I want to. Until they can run the football, they're just not going to have the heroics of what Travis Hunter did last year, and along with Shedeur. They went 7-2 last season, but they beat Baylor 38-31 in overtime. They beat Kansas State by 3 in a game where Shedeur Sanders threw for 388 yards and 3 touchdowns. They have to be able to protect the quarterback, and they have to be able to run the ball. And that's not going to help them out at all because they have all new starters on the offensive line except for left tackle Jordan Seaton. They only returned 3 starters on defense, and it's a defense last year that gave up 26 to North Dakota State, 31 to Baylor, 37 to Kansas, and 36 to BYU. And so I'm not high on Colorado, but in terms of and this is a very much a dark horse pick, if Deion is able to pull it together, because Sean Davis and I actually talked about this, and he brought up a funny fact about just, wouldn't it be ironic if the year that they learned how to protect the quarterback and run the football is the year that Shedeur's gone? Wouldn't that just kind of be the and we talked about it, and I was like, look, man, it would be ironic for sure. I don't know if they have necessarily the pieces to do that. This is also going to be the first year that we've seen Deion as a collegiate head coach without his son as a starting quarterback. If he's able to overcome all of that, he could sneak his way into the coach of the year conversation in the Big 12 if they're able to produce wins. But if they have the season that I think they're going to have, I don't see it happening for them. I think there's just too much ahead of them, too much. At number 9, I have the Kansas Jayhawks. Now, they have the potential to start in conference 3-0, maybe, but that is based off of my rankings and how I view these teams going out. I mean, look, they start out their year with West Virginia at home, Cincinnati at home, and then at UCF. But then after that, they have a stretch of at Texas Tech, they get Kansas State, and then they have at Iowa State and Utah to finish the season. They ended strong with wins last year over Iowa State, BYU, and Colorado. But it comes down to what Brian talked about. How's Jalen Daniels going to be? The offense runs through him. They're also going to have to replace Devin Neal.
He was so good.
Yeah, that's going to be a huge piece to replace on that offense. I read some stuff about Daniel Highshaw. He can be a good replacement. He's just never healthy.
Yeah, he's a good player. He's not Devin Neal, though. Yeah, he's a good player.
Yep. Not Devin Neal. Health has been a question for
They
him.
had a sneaky good backfield, like deep backfield at Kansas, but Devin Neal was just different. He was different.
Agreed completely. They got to figure out left guard and right tackle on their offensive line, and then it's a complete overhaul on the back 7 of their defense. I do like their defensive line with DJ Withers, Dean Miller, Tommy. I think I put Tommy Gunn because I was thinking about the chat, but I think his name is Tommy Dunn. But I'm thinking too much.
Did you watch Rocky V this week or something?
No, I see our guy Tommy Gunn in the chat so much. I just typed it in there in my notes. I was like, I know his name was not Tommy Gunn, but Tommy Dunn with a D returning on the defensive line. I like that unit a lot, but Brian, it comes down to what you talked about. They went 4-5 last season with Jalen Daniels. If he's healthy, it
Devin
could be
Neal.
a little bit more what we're talking about. Exactly. But they need a little bit more to pan out. This could very well be their ceiling in the Big 12, but we'll see what happens with Jalen Daniels. My number 8 team is BYU. We see this very similar. They went 7-2 last season. They have somewhat of a favorable schedule, if I'm being honest. They don't have Arizona State, Kansas State, or Baylor. Now, they still have at Colorado, Utah, at Iowa State, at Texas Tech, and then TCU, so that's not great. But as you'll see the rankings play out, not having Arizona State or Kansas State on your schedule is somewhat favorable. But it comes down to, can Kalani Sitake help galvanize his team after losing Retcliffe and all of the drama that came down with that? Can he find a way to bring this team together? And then you follow that up with, look, how do they replace him? How do they overcome that? Because he was a big focal point of their offense last year, rushing and passing. That's going to be a major question for me.
He is not a great quarterback, Trevor. He's a funky throwing motion, but he just was a gamer. He just like he was for them, like, the poor man's insert name. He was a poor man's Craig Krenzel. That's what he was. I would say Craig Krenzel doesn't get nearly enough credit for how good he was on that 2002 Ohio State team, because he wasn't a sexy player. He didn't throw for 1,000,000 yards, run for 1,000,000 yards. Wasn't a high draft pick, but he just was a gamer. When they needed a play to be made, he'd make a play, and that's how he was last year. And in a year where BYU had a lot of small margin for error wins, that stuff mattered. And not having that, I think, is going to hurt them more than I think some people may realize. More than I realize, because I would have not had them at 8. I think this is the only one you and I had in common. I believe, Trev. This is I think the only 2 that you and I had in common. I'm going to look at that.
I mean, it's one of the very few. I mean, outside of like the conference champions and stuff, like the final 2 we've gotten pretty in common, but everything outside of that,
we don't have them in the same spot. This is of the 16 teams, this is the only one that we have in the exact same spot. BYU, the only one. We've had multiples in the other leagues, but this is the only one in the Big 12 that you and I have at the same exact spot. We have one team in the title game, but I have one, you have them 2. But this is the only one that we are exactly on the same page with those players. Yep.
So I just don't know how BYU is going to be able to put it together. Their O-line has to improve. It's year 1 with TJ Woods as their offensive line coach. They have to replace their entire defensive line. They lost him to graduation. Starters. Now, defensive lines rotate a lot, but in terms of veteran experience, you lost 4 guys. And that's going to be huge for them. I do like their linebacking core. Jack Kelly and Isaiah Glasgow come back to their linebacking room, but they're going to have a new look secondary outside of Tanner Wall, who also returns. So BYU is going to have a tough road ahead of them. And then at number 7, I have the TCU Horned Frogs. They went 6-3 last season. I have them at a very similar season this year. Not helped. They get Arizona State, Kansas State, and Baylor. But I will say, well, actually, no. My notes are also wrong on this one again. 2 of them are on the road. They're not at home. So I believe they get Arizona State and Kansas State both on the road. But outside of that, they have somewhat of a favorable schedule. They have Cincinnati, Houston, West Virginia, and Colorado. Now, I love what they return. Josh Hoover returns, which is huge for the offense. They did lose 3 of their top – they lost 3 of their top receivers from last season, but they do return Eric McAllister. He had 762 yards and 5 touchdowns last year. Will they be able to run the football is a big question for me about TCU's offense. They averaged 113.9 yards per game last year, which was 113th in college football. I love Josh Hoover as a player, but I don't know if for 12 consecutive games you want to say, hey, go out there and win us every single game. Does he have that ability? Maybe. He's an electric playmaker, but I would want to get him some sort of run support to help him out. That is for sure. Their defensive coordinator, Andy Avalos, is going into his 2nd year. I love how they ended the season. They won 6 of their last 7 games, and their defense played a huge part in that. Truly, they held Utah to 7. They held Oklahoma State to 13. They held Cincinnati to 13, and they held Louisiana to 3. So their defense ended on a really high note. The success for TCU this year comes down to their ability to run the football and sustain defensive success. But if they're able to run the football, I could see TCU climbing up a little bit higher than 7th in my rankings.
So now we get into our next 4, Trevor, and I have the Iowa State Cyclones at number 6. And I get I think a lot of people tend to be higher on Iowa State than I am. You and I, this is probably the next closest one that we have, Trev. We have this one very close as well. But when I look at Iowa State, I just think last year was a bit of a, like, kind of everything went right season for them. You have Rocco Beck, kind of breaks out, has a great season. They win a lot of games last year, went 10-2, make it to the Big 12 title game, got absolutely smashed. Then they bounced back and beat Miami in a bowl game that I will still contend they don't win if Cam Ward plays the second half of that game. But you just look at that, a 1-point win over Iowa. They had a 3-point win over UCF. They lost by 1 to Texas Tech, lost at Kansas, beat Cincinnati, beat Utah by 3, beat Kansas that stayed at home by 8, and they got blown out. Like, I just look at their schedule, and it's like the only really good team they played all year smacked them pretty good. They're non-conference. I think they kind of caught some breaks. They got Baylor early in the year. They got Houston early in the year. Houston was a much better team than they were late. Baylor started the year 2-5. And obviously one of their losses was to Iowa State, and then Baylor won their next 6 games and didn't lose again until they played LSU in a bowl game, and that was a competitive game. So I just think a lot of things went their way, and when you combine that with 2,000-yard receivers that were day 2 draft picks, a gritty, tough quarterback, and a really good head football coach and really good coaching staff, they were able to overachieve last year, in my opinion, getting into the Big 12 title game. And I give Matt Campbell a lot of credit for the job he did last year. I just think they fall down about a normal place for them, which is more of like an 8-4 type of team. There's still a lot to like about Kansas State, Trev. I mean, they're not relying on a lot of transfers. They may only have like 4, 5, 6 transfers starting for them this year on both sides of the ball. We've got a lot of guys coming back that they're were part of the rotation last year, quality players, maybe not guys that started a ton, but guys that played. So I think that helps them a little bit too. So I think this is a good team, and I think this is probably the floor for where they're going to be this season. I just don't know that they're going to have the overall firepower that they had last year with Jalen Neal and just the type of receiving core they had last year. I just don't see them being able to repeat that. Plus, when you look at their schedule, I don't think their schedule's quite as favorable this year as it was last year. They have to play Iowa at home, which is good. But you get into their conference schedule, they got to play at Cincinnati, at Colorado, with Arizona at home. Like, you're like, okay, that's a good start. That's pretty favorable. Then their string of games next is home against BYU, home against Arizona State, at TCU, home against Kansas, at Oklahoma State. I think that's where the struggle will start happening. I think they lose at least one of Cincinnati and Colorado, but that 3-game stretch, it's funny they got – well, actually, I'm sorry, I forgot the game we mentioned early. They kicked the season off in Ireland against Iowa State or against Kansas State. But that 4-game stretch where they play K-State in game 1, and 2 weeks later they play Iowa State. Then they have Arkansas State on the road. Then there's a bye. Then there's a 3-game stretch against home against Arizona, at Cincinnati, at Colorado, and then another bye. If they come out of that 3-game stretch, which will include their first 4 playoff games with only 1 loss, then I will come on here and say, guys, I got Kansas State all wrong. I just think by then there's going to be 2 losses. And then now you've got to play BYU, Arizona State, TCU, Kansas, and Oklahoma State down the stretch. That's going to be tough. And so that's why that's the other thing that factors into why I don't have Iowa State as high as maybe some other people do. Number 5 for me is the Baylor Bears. I'm putting a lot of faith in Dave Aranda that what he did last season is something that is a beginning of things to come. Now, I could be completely wrong about this, and this is what I think makes Baylor a little bit tough to evaluate, Trev, is because they were 2 different teams last year. If you go back and look at Baylor the first 6 games of the year, they were 2-4. They got beat by Utah double digits. They lost at Colorado. They lost at home to BYU, and they got annihilated by Iowa State. Annihilated, 43-21. And it looked like the Dave Aranda era was kind of over because that was a big year for him. And they're just, he was a defensive coach. They had given up 38, 34, and 43 points in back-to-back games. And it was like, what's going on with this football team? And then all of a sudden, they catch fire after that. And the 4 games against FBS teams before their win streak, they'd scored 12, 31, 31, 28, and 21 points, which is kind of like, okay. In their last 6 regular season games, Trev, they scored 59 at Texas Tech in a win, 38 in a win over Oklahoma State, 37 in a win over TCU, 49 in a win at West Virginia, 20 in a road win over Houston, and then 45 in a road win over Kansas, and then scored 31 in a loss to LSU. So offensively, they bring back 8 starters, including 4 offensive linemen. Sawyer Robertson is a guy we've talked a lot about. Their receiving corps is potentially really dynamic. They also added Kobe Prentice. We talked about this when we did our wide receiver rankings, that Baylor was a potential. I think we talked about Baylor, but they were on one of my teams to consider list because of the 2 kids they have coming back. And then they get Kobe Prentice to transfer in from Alabama. So I think their offense is going to be really good. What's going to determine if Baylor can finish this here or higher, because I could see Baylor, with the way their schedule is, Trev, being in the championship game. They get Arizona State at home. They get Kansas State at home. They get Utah at home, UCF at home, and Houston at home. They're at Arizona, who I think is the worst team in the league. They're at Cincinnati, who is certainly a game they can beat on the road. The 2 tough road games are going to be at Oklahoma State, but that's not a game that they can't win. And then they play at TCU, which is going to be a tough game. That is one of the better schedules in the league. And the thing about Baylor is they can be I think they have the potential to be a Big 12 team that can make the playoff without having to win the league. But it's going to determine them going undefeated in the non-conference because they get Auburn at home to start the season, and then in week 2 they play at SMU. They can somehow win those 2 games. This is a team that could go 10-2 and say, hey, we have a case to be in the college football playoff. Look what we did out of conference. It's going to be tough. Or not 10-2, excuse me, 11-2 if they lose the conference championship game. I could see something like that. But here's the big key for them, Trevor. Their defense has got to get a ton better. A ton better. And that's the thing that gives me pause about having Baylor this high. That could be their downfall. They could end up losing they almost sort of look like an Art Briles team late in the year last year, where they scored a mess of points and gave up a mess of points. They're going to have to be able to do a better job of stopping people. They don't have to be a 17 to 20 point per game defense, but you just can't be as bad as you were down the stretch last season. They gave up 26.7 points per game last year, Trev. But if you look at even what they did during their 6-game winning streak, they gave up 35, 28, 34, 35, 10, and 17 points. That's 26.5 per game. If you throw the bowl game in there, during their 6-1 stretch to finish the season, they give up 29 points per game. That's not sustainable in this league for an entire season. That's how you are a hot team that looks good then and looks bad then. Defense has to get better. If they can just drop down to like 22, 23 points per game on average, they're going to win a lot of games because this offense is going to be able to score. They're one of the few teams in the league, other than Arizona State, that returns a quarterback, a running back, 2 of their top pass catchers, and 3 or more starting offensive linemen. And that's what I think is going to make this offense dangerous this season. Number 4 for me is the Utah Utes. This is my comeback story. And my thoughts on Utah are this, Trevor. They will not be a middle-of-the-pack team. They will not finish 6 to 11. They're either going to be top 4 or 5, or they're going to be bottom 4. Just because I feel like if Kirk Ferentz can hit all the right buttons, then they're going to win a lot. If he doesn't, they're going to struggle. This is just a team that screams to me no middle ground for Utah. You know what I mean? Like, I just don't see it. And last year, look, they struggled a little bit in the Big 12. I know he fired Andy Ludwig. I think he was a bit of a scapegoat for kind of how things went last year. But sometimes when you're struggling like that, you got to make some changes. This is also a team that had some really bad injury luck, and I just think that hurt them a lot as well. They put way too much on the quarterback. I mean, this is a team that started the year 4-0 with wins over an 11-point win over Baylor, a 17-point road win over Utah State, and a road win over Oklahoma State. And then the wheels fell off. They went 1-8 the rest of the year, 1-7 the rest of the year. Only win being at UCF. Had a 3-point loss to Iowa State at home, a 1-point loss to BYU, a 3-point loss to Houston, a 6-point loss to TCU, and an 8-point loss to Arizona. Like, they were like a team that was a lot closer to being better than they weren't. They went out and hired a new offensive coordinator, brought in a guy from New Mexico State, and they brought in his quarterback and one of his receivers. And so you always get nervous when you look at teams that bring in group of 5 players. We've seen a lot of group of 5 players that just don't make. I said New Mexico State. I'm sorry, it's New Mexico. But brought in the quarterback from Mexico, Devin Dampier. We've talked about him before this offseason. You look at his passing numbers, and you're like, dude, why are you hyping this kid up? It was 57.9% completion rate. He threw for 2,768 yards, 7.1 per attempt. He had 12 touchdown passes and 12 interceptions. Like, why are you hyping this kid up? What are you doing? And my answer is going to be because I watched him run. And I watched him go for over 100 yards in 6 different games last year. I watched him as the quarterback for New Mexico lead their offense to 39 points against Arizona in a game where he passed for 260 yards and rushed for 130 yards and account for 5 touchdowns against a Big 12 team. I watched the next week against Auburn where he passes for 291 yards and rushes for 31 yards, has over 300 yards of offense in that game. I just watched this kid play last year, and I'm like, this is a dynamic football player. Very dynamic football player. He's got to protect the ball better. He can't turn the ball. He can't have as many turnovers as he did touchdowns. But when you look at what he did on the ground, 130 yards on the ground against Arizona. He had 105 yards on the ground against Utah State, 207 on the ground against Wyoming, 127 on the ground against San Diego State, 193 on the ground against Washington State, and then 101 against Hawaii. He finishes with 1,166 yards and 19 touchdowns. And all of a sudden, if you can look at his numbers now, this is a kid that had 3,934 yards. He had 31 touchdowns and 12 picks. If those were passing numbers, people would be talking about, like, this is a big-time quarterback who had, because we've seen quarterbacks with 3,900 passing yards, minus 12 rushing yards, 31 touchdowns, passes, and 12 interceptions. We're like, that's a really good quarterback. But because a big chunk of his yards are rushing yards, and more of his rush touchdowns were rushing touchdowns than passing touchdowns. And then they passed that new rule in college football, which I thought was really cool, Trev, where rushing touchdowns for quarterbacks now count as much as passing touchdowns for quarterbacks, which I think is great. Did you know that? So, like, if you rush for a touchdown as a quarterback, that actually counts as much as when you throw for one. So 31 touchdowns now means the same as it does for a guy that throws all of those. I'm being obviously sarcastic because some people take everything I say super literally. And so I just needed to make sure that we're clear on that one. But I just think that kid's going to be dynamic. And look, I don't want to say like too much because I don't want it to turn into like a, he's your guy and all this other kind of stuff. But, you read some of the stuff coming out of Utah and it sounds like Tobias Merriweather's having a really good fall camp. We'll see if he can stay healthy. He was having a real good fall camp last year until he got hurt. They got a wide receiver last year in the portal, Larry Simmons. Out of Southern Miss, who's a pretty quality player. They got Ryan Davis out of the portal, who's a kid that was in New Mexico last year. Shifty slot guy that had 54 catches for 747 yards, 3 touchdowns last year. Is just over 1,000 yards the last 2 years combined. I think their offensive line has arguably the best tackle tandem in college football. The guards and center got to figure some stuff out, and the tackles are talented. Let me rephrase. They have arguably the most talented tackle tandem in college football. But my argument when we did the rankings is their film doesn't always like impress me the way it should. It's like dominant. Well, how'd you give up that sack? Dominant pressure, dominant run through. They've got to be more consistent. But when you've got that kind of line and those kind of weapons on offense, they're not. Their portal pickups on defense were all depth guys. Morgan Scalley, to me, is one of the better defensive coordinators in college football. So I just don't – I think Kyle Whittingham is not going to go out like a punk. He's not going to be like, well, the NIL, it sucks for us. He's going to do what he needs to do to try to get this thing turned around. And I just have a lot of faith that he's going to be able to do this. And we've seen him have to reinvent himself before. He's done this before when they went from, from the Mountain West to the Big 12. I remember correctly. Let me just pull this up because I don't want to say something that's incorrect here. But I thought I remember them having a bit of an adjustment to the Pac-12 as well. They did. So his last 4 years at Utah when they were in the Mountain West, they went 9-4, 13-0, 10-3, and 10-3. Then they joined the Pac-12. They go 8-5, 5-7, 5-7. Then after that, they won 9-10, 9-7, 9-11, COVID 10-10 is what he did. And then 8-5 is last year in the Big 12 or Pac-12. So it took him a few years to really get going in the Pac-12. And that's when Utah was loaded. I mean, they were just a few years removed from beating Bama in the Sugar Bowl. And it took him a while, and he figured it out. I think the transition to this league will be a lot quicker and a lot easier because it's just not as good of a league. So I just think Utah is going to bounce back. And I would argue that Utah's got a shot to finish even higher. I just got to see it, Trev. There's a area where I got to stop my faith in Kyle Whittingham because there's just too many players that got to show me something. How will Devin Dampier be going from a group of 5 team to a power 4 team? We talk about that all the time. I've seen a lot of quarterbacks that were real dynamic at that level come up to this level and perform. The reason I'm giving him more of the benefit of the doubt than others is because I watched him against 2 power 4 teams last year, and he put up some numbers, and they scored a lot of points. So and he's following his offensive coordinator. That's another big part because a lot of these guys are learning new systems. He's not. It's like John Mateer at Oklahoma. Why do I have more faith that John Mateer is going to be able to be successful? Well, number one, he was a power 4 quarterback prior to that as Cam Ward's backup. But then last year they weren't a power 4 team, and he put up a lot of numbers against teams that weren't that good. But I did watch him put up numbers against some teams that were power 4 and struggle against some. But he's following his offensive coordinator at Oklahoma. Same thing here with Devin Dampier. I think he's following his offensive coordinator, brought one of his receivers over. I think he's going to be able to make a smoother transition, and he is fun to watch. Very fun to watch. So that's why I have the Utes number 4. And then my number 3 team, Trev, is going to give away a little bit my championship game, Arizona State Sun Devils. I think Arizona State has the best, if not second best roster in the league. There's just a couple things that why I just, if you would have asked me before we actually went through the predictions, do I think Arizona State's going to be in the Big 12 title game? I'd have said, yeah, I probably have them winning it. But here's really what it boils down to for me. They have arguably the best or second best roster in the league, but I think you could also make a case they might have the toughest schedule of all the Big 12 teams. They got to play at Baylor. They have to play at Utah. They have to play at Iowa State and at Colorado. They get TCU at home, Texas Tech at home, Houston at home, West Virginia at home, and Arizona at home. I think that's one of the tougher schedules in the league. And when I look at Arizona State, I mean, obviously Jordan Tyson's a stud. They should have really good pass catchers. Kanye Udo was a 1,000-yard back at Army last year as a fullback for them. Their defense returns a lot of talent from last year's team. There's nothing that I look at and just don't feel great about with Arizona State. It just comes down to, I think that the slates for the teams I had ahead of them are just a little bit more advantageous than the others. And then also Kenny Dillingham has to show me that last year wasn't we maxed out as a team type of year. And to your point, Trevor, that you were talking about earlier, losing Cam Scadaboo isn't just about the yards and touchdowns he lost. He was an attitude player. He brought a follow me type of toughness and demeanor and attitude. And you have to ask yourself, are they going to still have that edge with him not there? And just you look at some of the plays he made against Texas in that bowl game, and you're just like, this is a dude. This is an absolute dude. So, I think that's really what it boils down to for me. I don't think Arizona State's the third best team roster-wise in the Big 12. I think the schedule just shakes out to where this is where it's going to be. And this is what you're going to have to run into when you have these imbalanced schedules because of the leagues having 16, 17, 18 teams. Is some years you're going to have a little tougher draw than another team. It used to be your tougher draw is we all play the same teams, but I get them on the road and you get them at home. Now it's like we only play the same teams. And I think that's what's going to make it a little bit tougher. So that's why I have Arizona State number 3. I do think this is the floor for Arizona State. If I'm wrong, it's because they're going to play for the Big 12 title. That's how I feel about this team. That's my 3 through 6, Mr. Trowbridge. Let's get to yours.
At number 6 for me, I have the Utah Utes. And I see this being somewhat of their floor. Honestly, I do. I don't know if I see them completely falling apart. And FanDuel also agrees. I mean, FanDuel has their win-loss at under 8.5 wins. And so I thought that was interesting when we pulled that up a little bit earlier. But that's where they have them as well. I'm going to be interested to see what Utah does this year, but they have the pieces. They went 2-7 last year, and I have them really bouncing back. They get Texas Tech, Arizona State, at BYU, at Baylor, Kansas State, at Kansas. Now, the benefit is they get Texas Tech, Arizona State, and Kansas State all at home. Like I said, they're one of my biggest conference risers, and one of the reasons is because of Devin Dampier. And they have a very experienced offensive line. They return 83 career starts, headlined by Spencer Fano, who is a consistent preseason first-team All-American. As far as his performance goes, talking about Devin Dampier, he does have to cut down on the turnovers, but he is an absolutely dynamic dual-threat guy. Questions are around the skilled positions because there is a lot to prove. You mentioned Tobias Merriweather. Can he finally put it together? Can he be healthy? You know, at Notre Dame, he was underutilized because of the experience of the wide receiver coach. And then he goes to Cal, and then it's like, okay, he's battling injuries. You are now a redshirt junior in college. Is it time to put it all together? And I think that remains to be seen, but I hope that he can, truthfully. But if Devin Dampier can help elevate those skill positions along with the new offensive coordinator, I have a lot of faith in Utah's offense. But I think they hold the key to success. To be honest with you, I'm not worried about the defense at Utah, truthfully. You go and you look at how they finished last year. Look, they went on a 7-game losing streak last season. They ended up ending it in the final regular season game. But on that 7-game losing streak, the offense only scored 28 points once. Outside of that, they were under 28 points for that entire losing game stretch. In that same amount of time, the defense allowed an average of 26 points. Mind you, the numbers that inflate that is they allowed 49 to Colorado and 31 to Iowa State. Outside of that, they didn't allow a single opponent to score over 24, I believe. And so the defense is not an area of concern for me. They return 5 starters. I like some of the talent they have on that side of the ball, but I echo a lot of the things that you did about Utah. I think this is their floor. Do I see a world where, Devin Dampier doesn't work out and, the offensive line doesn't perform up to expectations and they completely fall apart? I do, but I have enough faith in Kyle Whittingham as you do that I don't see that happening for them. So I have Utah as my number 16.
Real quick to your point, Trevor, you were talking about their against those two defenses. They gave up 49 points to Colorado. They gave up 31 points to Iowa State. They gave up 405 yards in each of those games. Those are the only 2 games all year that they gave up more than 400 yards a game. That's it. Those 2 games right there. And they had 5 turnovers in those 2 games as well. So I think that played a big part in why the points were what they were in that game. And also, if you go back and watch that game, Colorado scored 21 points in the fourth quarter, including a touchdown that they put on the board. They were up 42-24. They got the ball at the 19-yard line and ran it in with Travis Hunter. And at that point in time, Deion was trying to make his case for Travis Hunter being the Heisman Trophy winner. So they punched one in. They scored 2 touchdowns in the last 4.5 minutes of the game. And so that played obviously a big role in it. The last touchdown came after Utah. It was 35-24, and Utah threw a pick that Colorado turned into a touchdown drive. Then they turned it over on downs with like 3 minutes left, and Colorado punched it in from 19 yards out. So those were things that factored in. Even in that game, they had another touchdown drive that was only one play, 37 yards. It came after an interception. So to your point, their defense did not give up a lot of plays last year or like big games last year where they were like, oh my gosh, this team is terrible. And, that kind of thing. And another one of Colorado's touchdowns, I believe, let me go look. Their second touchdown of the game was the LeJohntay Wester 76-yard punt return for a touchdown. So like that gives some context to back up your point of even the game where they gave up a lot of points, didn't really give up a lot of points. And they certainly didn't give up a lot of yards in those games. It was just their team was just bad. And you mentioned the game where they gave up 31 points to Iowa State. Yeah, it's a lot of points, but one of Iowa State's touchdowns was a 23-yard drive, which again came after a Utah turnover. And then Iowa State scored with a minute and a half left to take the lead in the fourth quarter because they were up 28-24. So I just wanted to give that because that provides some context to the point you were making that this is not a defense that was the defense was not the problem last year, to your point. This is a team that lost a game while holding a team to 13 points. They lost another road game while holding a team to 17 points. They lost 22 yards, by 22 points, giving up 22 points. Like, the defense wasn't the problem last year.
No, not in the slightest. And look, I know it's kind of a running joke about Cam Rising, but I do think that him ultimately making the decision to not try to come back to Utah again is going to give them some clarity at the quarterback position. Instead of just trying to beat your head against the wall of, okay, now this will be the year that he's healthy and put it all together. It's unfortunate to see what happened to him because he did have flashes in the pan of being a pretty good college quarterback. But now that he's officially gone and they can just move on and go into this Devin Dampier era, I think that's going to help their offense a lot because, like we said, defense isn't the issue for Utah. My number 5 team is Iowa State. They went 7-2 in conference last year, and I still don't know what to make of this team. And I think part of the reason why is because a lot of their close wins were just super ugly. And you can take that one of two ways. You can take that as it's a gritty team with Rocco Becht and he's just a winner and Matt Campbell is a great coach. And while I do believe a lot of that to be true, I watched a lot of those. I watched the UCF game and they should not have won that football game. I mean, it's just Iowa State won ugly. It won close. I don't know if that's going to be repeatable, especially with some of the talent that they lost. Their wins were ugly. You beat Iowa 20-19. You beat UCF 38-35, 31-28 over Utah, like we talked about, and then you play a quality opponent in Arizona State, and then you get the doors blown off of you in the conference championship game. So this year it does help them out. They get their tougher opponents at home. You get Kansas State at home, BYU at home, Arizona State at home, Kansas at home. They are on the road against TCU and against Colorado, but Rocco Becht returns for his junior season. But they're going to have to replace Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins. It's going to be really tough. They have a very experienced right side of their offensive line, and then Carson Hansen returns as their starting running back. And then sounds like Abu Sama is going to be rotating in as well. Kind of a little bit of a change of pace back. But offensively, I like where they're at. Defensively, they have experience at every level. It's headlined by Caleb Bacon returning off of injury. At one point in time, he was supposed to be their best defensive player, but he got hurt, unfortunately. And then Dominic Orange returning as their nose guard is also huge. But Iowa State's just one of those teams that I just don't know what to make of because of how they won their football games. This is a telling year. I am under the impression, I believe that this is their ceiling. I don't know if they get much higher than this. I could see them dropping a little bit because of what their conference schedule is. Because they get Kansas State and because they're on the road against Colorado and they get BYU and they get Arizona State and they're on the road against TCU, and they finish up the season on the road against Oklahoma State. Now, if they have the season that you're thinking about, Oklahoma State, I'm saying, that becomes a much more intriguing game to round out the regular season. But if they are what I think they could potentially be, because who knows, that game may be chalked up as a dub. So Iowa State is going to be a very interesting team to follow this upcoming season. My number 4 team is Texas Tech, and I went with their ceiling as well. They have a tough conference schedule. They're at Utah, they're at Arizona State, they're at Kansas State, and they host BYU. That is a rough schedule. Now, one of the things that I like about this team is they can put up points on anybody. I'm confident in that. And I think a lot of it is scheme driven. I mean, look, man, they put up 52, but they had games where they scored 52, 66, 44, 56, and 52 last year. Baron Morton returns as their starting quarterback. I like the Quentin Joyner pickup. I have the same questions that you do around what is his workload going to be like. I don't know if it's going to be similar to Taj Brooks, but I like the pass catching ability that Quentin Joyner brings you as well. I think that's going to be interesting. They return Caleb Douglas and Coy Eakin at wide receiver from last year. Offensive line is going to be a little bit of a question mark. They only returned 2 starting offensive linemen, but the biggest question in Texas Tech's success, like I said, this is a ceiling pick for me. If their defense doesn't improve, I don't think they're sniffing top 5 in this conference. Look, man, their defense last year was not good. They gave up 51 points to Abilene Christian, 41 to Cincinnati, 59 to Baylor, 35 to TCU, 41 to Colorado, 48 to Oklahoma State, and 39 to Arkansas. They had the number 132 pass defense in the country last year. Their defense, for all intents and purposes, was atrocious. So, new defensive coordinator, Sheil Woods, he has a pretty low bar to come in and surpass. They do return some pieces on defense. Jacob Rodriguez comes back at linebacker, along with Ben Roberts. And then cornerbacks Marion Horn and A.J. McCarty also return. But they have to get better on the defensive line, which is why they dipped into the transfer portal. If David Bailey works out and if Ashton Gillott works out, maybe. How bought in are they going to be, though, with that type of conference schedule if things start to go south? I would like to think that David Bailey has more of a proven track record of staying committed to something, considering, no offense, he played at Stanford for multiple seasons.
And
but
the only reason David Bailey left Stanford is because of all the craziness there.
Oh, like, yeah.
He was a spring transfer, I believe, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Because they fired the head coach. He was not going to leave Stanford. He didn't jump. He was going to stay there. Yep. He's different than the other kids I'm talking about. Like Romello Height he's at a new school for the 4th straight year. That's a completely different animal. Wow. I totally get why David Bailey left. The rest of them, it's a little bit of a different situation.
Absolutely. I could absolutely see David Bailey staying bought into whatever Texas Tech has going on, even if their conference schedule doesn't end up favorable. But like I said, this is a ceiling pick for me. I don't see them getting much higher. They're one of the teams that I just don't understand the hype of. I've seen some people put them inside of the top 15, and I just don't see it. But if they reach the peak of their ceiling, they could be in the top quarter of this conference. I do believe that, if they get the defense shored up. Mm-hmm. And the number 3 for me are the Baylor Bears. They went 6-3 last season, and they have one of the more experienced rosters in conference. I do put a lot of weight into that, considering how much turnover basically the rest of the conference had outside of like Kansas State and Arizona State. They returned 13 starters on offense and defense. Should help against their schedule. They get Arizona State, Kansas State, they're at TCU, and they get Utah, but their toughest opponents are at home except for TCU. I like their receiving core. Josh Cameron and Ashton Hawkins are going to be good players. They return their starting quarterback and starting running back Sawyer Robertson and Bryson Washington. And they return 4 of their 5 starting offensive linemen, which is also going to be huge for their success. Defensively, they'll have to step it up. They gave up 34 points or more in all 5 of their losses last year. And they even gave up 28 points or more in 3 of their wins. So defensively, they have to get better, or it's going to be rough for them to reach the number 3 team in this conference. But I think that they can. They have an experienced secondary returning in Caden Jenkins, Carl Williams, and then Devin Bobby also comes back. A question for me for Baylor's defense is their defensive line. Are they going to be able to generate that much pressure? And if they're able to get after the quarterback a little bit, I think they're going to have the ability to let an experienced secondary eat a little bit. But you don't want to get into the Art Briles, Baylor type of teams where you have to score 45 to 50 points a game to be a 9-win team. And so if they're able to do that, I see them living up to that number 3 ranking, Brian. But that's my 3 through 6.
Dude, I dig it. I mean, we see some of these teams the same way. But it's even in this ranking, you see where you got Texas Tech and where I got Texas Tech. Like, you could make a case that they're going to be 4, and I'm just like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. And I would hope that as I'm reading off all the concerns I have about them being 11th, you're like, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense.
100%.
Like, that's what makes this. It's what I'm so excited about this Big 12 this year, man. It's going to be such a fun league to watch, man. I keep telling y'all, if you like college football, and you're like, I hope that more fans become like the kind that don't just watch their team and then want to tell everyone that, no, my team's better than yours based on what? Well, it is because I love my team. Well, have you watched that other team play? No. But I know they're not as good as my team. Watch the Big 12 this year. It's going to be a really fun league. I really think it is, and there's really good quarterback play. It's that time, Trevor. Big 12 championship game. Here's who I got. I got number 1, the Kansas State Wildcats. I think this is the most complete team, along with Arizona State, in the Big 12. By complete, I mean a team that should be really good on offense, and a team that should have a pretty quality defense. I think we could debate which one is going to be better this year, but I think on the whole, I think Kansas State is a team that I think is just going to be a little bit better And then I also think, as I said, that Kansas State has just a little bit of a more favorable schedule this season in certain areas. There's a couple tough stretches on their schedule. But here's where I'm at with it. I think you've got a very dynamic quarterback who's going into his second year as a starter, third year in college. You've got one of the more big play receivers in the league, and JC Brown. I was drawing a blank for a second on his last name. You've got a really good 1-2 punch at running back. Dylan Edwards steps in, and for the game, the first game, he's really the guy, which was the bowl game. And I know it was a bowl game, and you don't put too much in bowl games. Well, whatever. I watched that bowl game, and I'm telling you, that kid went off. He was going off in that game. First game without DJ Giddens, he goes for 196 yards and 2 touchdowns on 18 carries, and had 2 catches for 27 yards and another touchdown. It was a bowl game against Rutgers. They still scored 41 points against Rutgers. That's pretty good. Do you know who else scored 41 points on Rutgers last year? Nobody. I'm sorry, Wisconsin and USC had 42 each, but nobody scored 44 points. I'm sorry, Rutgers gave up 44 points. Nobody scored more than that against them. And then obviously you look at what Avery Johnson did that game as well. And you're like, dude, this is a dynamic 1-2 punch. They are, Avery Johnson last year finished with 605 rushing yards, 5.4 per carry. There's just not the volume. He did it doing some big plays also. And he had 4 rushing touchdowns in the last 6 games. He didn't have any in the first 4 games. So the more he kind of got into being, hey, this is when to go. This is when to let her loose. I think made that team real good. I think their defense is got to get a little bit better, but it's not terrible. They had a couple games where they struggled. They gave up 41 points in the bowl game. Wasn't great. After that, they didn't have a single game they gave up more than 29. They gave up 27 to Tulane. I'm sorry, I forgot about BYU. They gave up 38 to BYU. 20 to Oklahoma State, 28 to Colorado, 18 to West Virginia, 27 to Kansas, 24 to Houston, 24 to Arizona State, 15 to Cincinnati, 29 to Iowa State. So it's got to get better, but it wasn't terrible. And that's where I think they get a little bit of an edge over teams like Baylor and Texas Tech, because when you look at those teams, they've got to get better. I think Kansas State's going to be every bit as good on offense this year as those teams, at least from a skill player wise. But the difference is they don't have to make the big improvement that those teams make. And they bring back 5 starters, had a pretty good transfer portal season this year. You mentioned the Romaine as the conference player of the year. They also bring back his sidekick would be Desmond Purnell comes back. So I think they're just going to be just good improvement for them on defense makes them championship caliber. Good improvement for Baylor makes them just not terrible. Good improvement for Texas Tech makes them they're not terrible anymore. Improvement from K-State makes them a pretty good defense. And I just think that's where they're going to be. I like this team. They were not quite as good last year. They have been in past years on defense. So I like where this team is. You replaced a very veteran quarterback with a young quarterback last year, and you dealt with young quarterback mistakes. I think that changes this year, and I think K-State's the team to beat. And then the surprise is TCU. I think that's the one that probably has a lot of people thinking wait a second, you have TCU as your number 2 team in the league? Yes, I do. And there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, Trev, is going to come as no surprise to you. I absolutely love Josh Hoover. I think another thing that I like about TCU is they're one of those teams that's not relying on the transfer portal. There's a case, as I said earlier, they may only have 4 or 5 transfer portal guys in their starting lineup this year, and they were selective. And where they got transfer portal guys are where I think you can have a little easier transition when it comes to your overall production, and that is the fact that they went to the portal to get skill players. They're going to have a couple wide receivers that are going to have to step up and perform. But you're talking about a kid that they got from Idaho last year who had 8 catches for 1,192 yards and 12 touchdowns in Jordan Dwyer, wide receiver. He's coming to a system where he's going to get the ball thrown to him a lot. So I think I look at it and say, that's where I'm okay with needing to get guys. They have 1 D lineman that's projected to start, and then 1 DB that's projected to start. Everybody else are guys that they've recruited and developed. And I think that helps them. I do. I think that's going to help make them a better football team. Now, they went to the portal to get some depth, and that's okay, but they don't necessarily need it to go out there and win. I do think the thing with TCU for me that I do want to see them this season, Trevor, is they need to be a little bit more balanced than they were last season. When they played for the national championship, they ran for 193 yards per game with Kendre Miller. They fell off the next year down to 154, and then last year they fell all the way down to 113. That's going to have to get better. They're going to have to get better there. Offensive line, that's one of the question marks that I have about Kansas State. With TCU, I don't have quite the same question marks with their offensive line. I think they should be a little bit better on the offensive line this year. They have, again, they only got 2 returning starters, but the guys that are stepping in and replacing them are guys that were from the system, guys that they recruited, guys that they've developed. And I just think that's going to allow them to be a little bit more of a cohesive team. Like I said, love Josh Hoover. And then at the end of the day, it's Sonny Dykes has proven he can win. And he didn't just do it here. He did it at Louisiana Tech. He did it at Cal. I think they're a team. You lost by 1 point to UCF. You lost by 3 points to Baylor, and you lost to SMU. But they were a pretty good football team last year. Went 9-4, lost three games in league play. One of them was a 1 point loss to UCF where they just blew it late. The other was a 3 point road loss to Baylor, and they weren't like necessarily skating by in all their wins either. I mean, they had a close win over Texas Tech by a point. They beat Cincinnati by a touchdown, but they beat Arizona by 21, Oklahoma State by 25, beat Utah by a touchdown on the road, beat Kansas by 11. So I really like this TCU football team. I also think their schedule is kind of sets up the way you like it to set up, Trev, where their 2 toughest games, you could argue, are on the road, and then the rest of them are at home. They get Colorado at home. They get Baylor at home, which is huge. They get Iowa State at home, which is huge. They play Cincinnati at home. They play at West Virginia, which is a game I think they can go on the road and win. And then they play at Houston, which is a game I think they go on the road and win. They start off at Arizona on September 26th, and then 2 weeks later, they go to Kansas State. That's going to be tough. And right now, I have them losing both of those games. But I have them beating West Virginia on the road. I have them beating BYU on the road. And then not handling like they're going to blow them out, but then beating Baylor and Iowa State at home. And so that's why I have the TCU Horned Frogs. Love their quarterback. Trust Sonny Dykes. Schedule's challenging, but sets up nicely for them. Because if it was opposite, I could see them losing at home to Kansas State and Arizona State, and then also losing at Baylor and at Iowa State. You know what I mean? So, like, if they had Arizona State and K-State at home, I could see them losing both of those games. But then those other 2 games at Baylor, at Iowa State, at Cincinnati, they could lose 2 of those 3 also. But because you get Baylor, Iowa State, and Cincinnati at home, I think they're more capable of beating those teams than maybe they would be beating Arizona State and Kansas State. So that's why I say sometimes the schedule is what gets you in there. And TCU, to me, is not the second best team in the Big 12. They're going to have the second best record in the Big 12. And that's why I have them in it. So I'm going K-State 1, TCU number 2. If I'm wrong, it'll be the Sun Devils. That's how I feel about it. I'm pretty confident in K-State being in there.
This is a pretty good transition into who I think is going to make the conference championship game, Brian, because I have the number 1 Arizona State Sun Devils versus the number 2 Kansas State Wildcats. Now, look, I'm not going to regurgitate a lot of the stuff that Brian said about Kansas State because I agree completely. They're going to have a rough schedule this year. I do have some question marks around their ability of the offensive line to sustain. They were number 10 in the country in sacks allowed last year, but they have to replace 3 starters. They're able to maintain that. I really like their chances because Avery Johnson and Dylan Edwards are a very dynamic duo in the backfield. They're going to be very electric, a lot of big plays. Question is if he can improve as a passer, which he started to show some signs of last season, which I really like. They boast one of the better defensive lines in conference. They have a deep rotation. I think that Toby Usensanmi has a pretty big year for them. He had 5.5 tackles for a loss, 3.5 sacks, and a rotational role. He kind of steps into the limelight this season. So I'm going to be interested to see what kind of impact he makes. But then again, their defense is going to be led by Austin Romaine. He's my defensive player of the year in conference. They only allowed 2 opponents to score over 30 points at all last year, and that was BYU and Rutgers. Outside of that, a team didn't touch 30. When you have an offense like that, that is a good recipe for success. So I have Kansas State as my number 2 team. And then I have Arizona State as my number one team. This is a much of a prove-it year for Kenny Dillingham as it gets for any other coach. Was last year just you got overlooked so much, and then there's some people that think you backdoored your way into the conference championship game. Is it more of that? Or are you putting together a really, really good program? Because they have the pieces. Here's how I look at their schedule. If Arizona State is able to make it out of Texas Tech, either with one loss or unscathed, I really, really like their chances to repeat. Because outside of that, you got at Houston, or you're home against Houston, you're at Iowa State, home against West Virginia, at Colorado, home against Arizona. Those are all teams outside of Iowa State that I have in the bottom half of the league per my projections. It could be different depending on if they end up, like certain teams end up a little bit better than what I'm predicting them to. But I think that's a favorable back half of the conference schedule. But if you're Arizona State and you get out of that and you're 1-3 or potentially 0-4, it's going to be tough for you to fight your way back into. You're going to have to hope for the same thing that you did last year, a little bit of chaos. But I love what this team brings back, man. They returned 16 starters on offense and defense. I said it before, I think Sam Leavitt and Jordan Tyson, I think that connection could be like the best quarterback wide receiver connection in the conference. It showed that to be last year at certain times. It wouldn't surprise me if they did it again. They have a very experienced offensive line. They returned 4 of their 5 starters. The Scadaboo conversation is very valid. How do you replace that experience? And I'm going to take a page out of Marcus Freeman's book. You don't replace it with a name. You replace it with multiple people. You have to replace the production. You don't replace Cam Scadaboo as a player. And so between Kyson Brown, Raleek Brown, and Kanye Udo, who's an 1,000-yard rusher at Army, I think, and honestly, because of Cam Scadaboo's style of running, I think Kanye Udo kind of gives you the most replicatable way to replace him from a playing style standpoint. I don't know if he's going to be able to then, I don't know what Kanye Udo's ability is to catch wheel routes down the field against Texas or to throw a touchdown against Texas, but I'm pretty confident in his abilities to punch one in from the 2-yard line. And so I like their makeup of their running back room. It's a lot of potential. I got to see it. But then defensively, they returned 9 starters. And they turned it around in the final quarter of last season. You know, they allowed less than 24 points to end the season from November 16th to the playoff game when they played Texas, who scored 39. So if the defense can continue that momentum, I like their chances to repeat as Big Ten champions. So I have Arizona State and Kansas State in the conference championship, and then I have the Sun Devils going back-to-back.
That's big. I got Kansas State winning it. I'll say this. I think that I would feel much more concerned about K-State winning it if they had to play Arizona State on a neutral field, because they don't play each other in the regular season. I don't know that Arizona State's a great matchup for Kansas State. I think Kansas State will be better than TCU, and I think they'll beat TCU twice. That's kind of how I see it. Now, TCU could get some payback, because remember, when they played for the title in 2022, it was K-State it was TCU that won the regular season game against K-State. And then K-State got payback in the 2022 Big 12 title game over TCU, but TCU still made the college football playoff, as they should have that season. So I think what I would say, I feel comfortable saying, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, I feel comfortable saying that Arizona State and K-State will be two of the 3 best teams in the league.
Oh,
where I think the question comes down to, for me, and it is, and I'm curious what you think is, I don't know how I'm comfortable I am with saying that TCU, for example, will definitely be will be the 3. Even though I have them 2, I could see them not being that good. I think K-State's floor is 2 or 3. I think Arizona State's floor is 2 or 3. I think ceiling for both is 1. I've explained why I don't have Arizona State in there. I'm curious if you feel the same way, or like, because you have Baylor as one of your 3.
mm-hmm.
Like, are you locked in? Like, these are the 3 best teams in the league. Like, where's your drop off for tier? Because it's like in my tiers, I think K-State and Arizona State are the proven tier 1s for me of the Big 12. Even though I technically don't have Arizona State in the top 2, which is weird because again, this is a record prediction, not a power prediction. And I think with Arizona State, it really comes down to, as I said, for me, I just don't think their schedule sets up as favorably as it does for TCU. They've got to play at Baylor. They have to play at Iowa State. They have to play at Colorado, at Utah. And then they get Texas Tech at home. They get TCU at home. So I just think it's really about the schedule for me. So that's where I'm at, Trev.
Yeah, I think that Arizona State and Kansas State, if we're talking power rankings, are kind of in a league of their own. And then outside of that, I mean, to give you a window in, I know we're not talking about overall records, but to show you how close this is for me, I have Baylor at 7-2, Texas Tech at 7-2, Iowa State at 6-3, Utah at 6-3, TCU at 6-3. So my basically 3 through 7 I see them on equal playing fields. That's why I don't have TCU in my conference championship. Far from it. I have them at 7th. But they're a game out from being my 3rd team. You know what I mean? Like, that's what's weird about the Big 12. That's what's going to make it so interesting. So, no, we see that the same. I think that Arizona State and Kansas State are kind of the tier 1 of this conference, and then the tier 2 is loaded with like 6 different teams. And there's arguments to be made for 2 to 3 teams outside of the tier 2 that could be in tier 2 if stuff like if for a BYU, things kind of piece together for them. But so it's going to make the Big Ten that much more fun to watch this year, man.
Yep. Well, there you go, Trev. That is our breakdown of the Big 12. Now, the nice thing is tomorrow, y'all are going to get to see the brackets. So we've kind of given you our predictions of the leagues. Now we get to go through and put our brackets out. It's going to be a very, very fun show. Tomorrow at 1 o'clock. It's going to start tomorrow at 1 o'clock.
Before you head out of here today, folks, be sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. But as always, the best way to support what we do here, Brian has some awesome intel on the boards.irishbreakdown.com. Make sure to hop over into the Champions Lounge.
Some more up on the quarterback thing a little bit later because people are taking some things that I've said the wrong way and just jumping off of a cliff. And yeah, I should have waited till after the show to put that up, but I wanted to get that to people, but people have lost their minds. So I'm going to put clarification on what I think is happening at the quarterback position and why, my thoughts about it, some things I like about it, some things I don't like about it. So I'm going to go work on that for the next 20 minutes or so. So if you're a board member, you're going to want to check that out in the next 20 minutes or so. And if you're not, then you're going to want to sign up and check that out. Boards.com.
In about an hour, IB Nation Sports Beat is also going live to also be talking about some of the quarterback competition things going on in camp. So be sure to hop over and check them out. Brian and I will be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. You will get to see the brackets. They do exist and they are real. And we're going to show them to you tomorrow at 1 p.m. But until then, that's Brian. I'm Trevor. We'll see you back here very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.